They said she was a fool for loving a killer. The town whispered it behind gloved hands, spat it across saloon counters, preached it from church pews. Lydia Hartwell, 23, educated, respectable, had thrown her heart at the feet of Colorado's most wanted outlaw. But on the day Caleb Rourke stood before a judge and called her the greatest wisdom I ever possessed, those same voices fell silent. This is their story, of bullets and books, of a choice that defied reason, and a love that rewrote destiny. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The first time Lydia Hartwell saw Caleb Rourke, she thought death had ridden into Whispering Creek on a black gelding. It was late September of 1875, and the Colorado afternoon hung thick with dust and the smell of coming rain. Lydia stood on the weathered porch of Hartwell's General Store, her father's ledger tucked under one arm, watching the street with the practiced disinterest of someone who'd seen the same faces, the same horses, the same tired dreams roll through this town for 23 years. Then he appeared. The stranger rode in from the eastern trail, where the aspens were already turning gold and the mountains cut purple shadows across the valley. His horse was road-weary, flanks dark with sweat, but the man himself sat straight in the saddle with the kind of stillness that made Lydia's breath catch. He was tall. She could tell even mounted, with shoulders that filled his dark duster and a hat pulled low enough to shadow most of his face. But it wasn't his size that made the street go quiet. It was the way every man on that dusty road stopped what he was doing. The blacksmith's hammer fell silent mid-strike. Old Timothy Marsh, who'd been sweeping the boardwalk in front of the boarding house for the better part of an hour, froze with his broom mid-sweep. Even the Calloway boys, who never shut up about anything, stopped their argument about horse breeding and stared. Lydia felt it too, that electric charge in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. The stranger dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. When he finally lifted his head and pushed back his hat, Lydia saw his face clearly for the first time. It was a hard face. Not cruel, but carved by something harsh and unforgiving, weather or violence or both. A scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, pale against sun-darkened skin. His eyes, startlingly blue beneath dark brows, swept the street with the careful assessment of a man who'd learned to catalog exits and threats before he cataloged anything else. Those eyes landed on her. For a heartbeat, maybe two, their gazes locked. Lydia felt something shift in her chest, recognition without knowledge, like her soul knew something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. Then he looked away, looping his reins around the hitching post with practiced efficiency. Lydia. Her father's voice cut through her thoughts, sharp with warning. Inside. Now. She turned to find Thomas Hartwell standing in the doorway, his face pale beneath his gray beard. In all her years, she'd never seen her father look quite like that, somewhere between fear and fury, with something else underneath she couldn't name. Papa, who? Inside, he repeated, his hand gripping her elbow with uncharacteristic force. And stay away from the windows. But Lydia had never been good at following orders she didn't understand. The moment her father turned his back to hurry toward the counter, she positioned herself beside the pickle barrel, where she had a clear view through the front window. The stranger was walking toward their store. She watched him cross the street with measured steps, his duster sweeping behind him, his right hand hanging loose at his side near the revolver she could now see holstered at his hip. He moved like water, she thought, smooth and inevitable, following the path of least resistance but unstoppable all the same. When he pushed through the door, the bell above it seemed to ring with a different tone than usual, sharper, more urgent. Up close, he was even more imposing. 6'3" at least, with broad shoulders and the lean, hard build of someone who'd known hunger and survived it. The scar on his face was worse than she'd thought, a clean line that must have come from a blade, not a bullet. It should have made him ugly, but instead it gave his face a strange, terrible beauty, like a statue that had been broken and imperfectly mended. Help you? Her father's voice was cold, clipped. The stranger pulled off his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. Coffee if you have it, he said. His voice was low, roughened by trail dust and disuse, with the faint drawl of someone who'd spent time in Texas, or maybe Oklahoma. Sugar. ammunition for a Winchester 73, and books, if you stock them. Books. Lydia felt her eyebrows rise despite herself. It was an odd list, supplies and literature in the same breath, violence and learning side by side. No coffee, her father lied. Lydia could see the tin of Arbuckles right behind him on the shelf. No sugar either. Ammunition's in the back. Books are over there, but they're not for sale. It was another lie. They had 3 shelves of books that Papa was always trying to move, complaining that nobody in Whispering Creek read anything more challenging than wanted posters and mail-order catalogs. The stranger's blue eyes flicked toward the shelves Lydia was standing beside, then back to her father. Something flickered across his face. Amusement, maybe, or resignation. I see. He set a silver dollar on the counter. The ammunition, then. 2 boxes, if you have them. Thomas Hartwell didn't move toward the back room. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a growl that Lydia had to strain to hear. I know who you are, Rourke, and I'll thank you to conduct your business and ride on out of here. We don't want your kind in Whispering Creek. Rourke. The name hit Lydia like a physical blow. Caleb Rourke. Even here, 200 miles from anywhere important, that name carried weight. She'd heard it whispered in church circles, read it in the occasional newspaper that made its way up from Denver. The outlaw who'd killed 7 men in a gunfight in Abilene. The ghost who disappeared into the mountains and reappeared months later with a new bounty on his head. The man who'd supposedly robbed a Wells Fargo stage and left the driver tied to a tree with a note pinned to his chest that read, "Tell your bosses to pay their guards better." But Lydia had also heard other stories, whispers that came from traveling merchants and gamblers passing through. Stories about how Caleb Rourke never killed anyone who wasn't trying to kill him first. How he'd returned money to a widow after discovering her life savings were in the strongbox he'd taken. How he'd carried a wounded deputy 10 miles to the nearest doctor and disappeared before anyone could catch him. She didn't know which stories were true. Maybe none of them. Maybe all of them. But looking at him now, standing quietly in her father's store with his hat in his hands, she couldn't reconcile the legends with the man. There was something careful in his posture, something almost courteous in the way he kept his distance from the counter, as if he knew his presence was an intrusion and wanted to minimize it. I'm not here to cause trouble, Caleb Rourke said quietly. Just passing through. Need some supplies, then I'll be gone. See that you are. Her father's jaw was tight. Lydia, get the man at his ammunition. She moved before she could think about it, grateful for something to do besides stare. The back room was dark and cool, smelling of gun oil and leather and the dried herbs her mother used to hang from the rafters before she died. Lydia found the Winchester cartridges on the second shelf, her hands shaking slightly as she grabbed 2 boxes. When she returned, Caleb Rourke had moved away from the counter and was standing in front of the bookshelves, his back to the room. His shoulders were rigid, and she realized he'd positioned himself so he could see the door's reflection in the window glass. A man who never stopped watching for danger. She set the ammunition on the counter with a soft thunk. Her father snatched it up immediately, wrapping it in brown paper with sharp, angry movements. But Lydia's attention had shifted to what Caleb Rourke was holding, her mother's Shakespeare. It was a thick volume, bound in green leather that had faded to sage over the years, with gold lettering that had long since worn away on the spine. Catherine Hartwell had brought it with her from Boston when she'd married Thomas and moved west, and she'd read from it every night until the consumption took her 5 years ago. Nobody had touched that book since. Lydia couldn't bring herself to, and her father refused to even look at it. But Caleb Rourke held it like it was made of glass and moonlight. His fingers traced the embossed cover with something that looked like reverence. He opened it carefully, mindful of the loose binding, and Lydia saw his eyes move across the pages with the unmistakable rhythm of someone actually reading, not just looking. "That's not for sale," her father snapped. Rourke looked up, and for the first time, Lydia saw something in his face besides watchful neutrality. It was pain, old and deep, the kind that never really heals. "I didn't figure it was," he said softly. He closed the book with the same care he'd opened it and set it back on the shelf, his fingers lingering on the spine for just a moment. "My sister used to read Shakespeare. She'd act out the scenes, make me play the other parts. I was terrible at it, but she'd laugh and say that's what made it perfect. The past tense sat heavy in the air. Used to read. Used to laugh. Lydia felt something crack in her chest. Something she'd kept carefully walled off since her mother died. Since she'd learned that the world took the people you loved and gave you nothing but memories in return. Your ammunition, her father said coldly, shoving the wrapped package across the counter. $2. It was highway robbery. Ammunition cost 75 cents a box at most. But Caleb Rourke just nodded, pulled out $2 silver, and set them beside the package. Much obliged. He tucked the ammunition into his duster pocket and headed for the door. Lydia moved without thinking. Wait. Both men turned to look at her, her father with alarm, Rourke with surprise. She grabbed 3 books from the shelf, a collection of Emerson essays, a volume of Byron's poetry, and a dime novel about a Texas Ranger that someone had left behind months ago. Take these. Lydia! Her father's voice cracked like a whip, but she was already crossing the room, her heart hammering against her ribs, her hands shaking as she held the books out to Caleb Rourke. Up close, she could see that his eyes weren't just blue. They were the color of a Colorado sky before a storm, pale and electric and impossible to look away from. She could see the fine lines at their corners, the shadow of stubble along his jaw, the way his throat moved when he swallowed. I can't, he started. You can, she interrupted. Consider it a loan. You can return them when you pass back through. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Men like Caleb Rourke didn't pass back through. They kept moving, always one step ahead of their past, never stopping long enough to return anything. But he took the books anyway, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment. Even through her gloves, she felt the calluses on his palm, the warmth of his skin, the tremor that might have been hers or his or both. Thank you, he said, and his voice was rough with something that sounded like gratitude but felt like grief. I'll take good care of them. Then he was gone, the door swinging shut behind him, the bell's ring fading into the afternoon quiet. Lydia stood frozen, her hands still outstretched, her heart still racing. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Her father's voice was low and dangerous. That man's blood runs cold, Lydia. He's killed more men than the Winters claimed, and you just... He liked Shakespeare, she said quietly, and he had a sister who laughed. Had, her father repeated. Past tense. And do you know why? Because men like him destroy everything they touch. Everyone they care about ends up dead or worse. Lydia turned to look at him, really look at him. Thomas Hartwell had aged 10 years since her mother died. His beard had gone from gray to white. His shoulders had developed a permanent stoop, and his eyes, once bright with dreams of the life they'd build in this wild country, had gone flat and defeated. He was afraid, she realized. Not of Caleb Rourke specifically, but of the chaos and violence the outlaw represented. Her father had spent 5 years building walls around his heart, convincing himself that if he controlled everything, if he kept danger at arm's length, if he never took risks or made waves or let himself care too much, he could avoid more pain. But Lydia had spent those same 5 years reading her mother's books, tracing the words Catherine Hartwell had underlined, trying to understand what her mother had believed about life and love and the courage it took to live fully. And one phrase kept coming back to her, from a play her mother had marked up more than any other. The course of true love never did run smooth. Catherine Hartwell had chosen a hard life when she married a shopkeeper and moved to Colorado. She'd left behind comfort and society and everything she'd known. And yes, it had been difficult. Yes, she'd suffered. Yes, she'd died too young. But Lydia remembered her mother's laugh, bright and free. She remembered the way her parents had danced in the kitchen when they thought she was asleep, her father humming off key while her mother closed her eyes and smiled. She remembered her mother saying just weeks before she died, I would do it all again, my darling. Every hard mile, every hungry winter, every moment of fear, because I got to live a life I chose with a man I loved in a place that took my breath away every single morning. That was wisdom, Lydia thought, the kind the world called foolish. Papa, she said gently, he's not going to hurt anyone. He just wanted books. You don't know what he wants. Her father shook his head. Stay away from him, Lydia. I mean it. That man is nothing but trouble, and I won't have you getting caught up in whatever storm he's trailing. But as Lydia turned back to the window and watched Caleb Rourke ride slowly toward the edge of town, she thought about the way he'd held her mother's Shakespeare, like it was something precious and breakable and sacred. And she thought maybe, just maybe, the storm wasn't following him. Maybe it was already here. The town of Whispering Creek, Colorado, wasn't much to speak of, a cluster of buildings huddled at the base of the Rockies, connected by dirt roads that turned to mud every spring and froze solid every winter. Population never topped 200, and that was counting the outlying ranches and the prospectors who came down from the mountains once a month for supplies and civilization. It was the kind of place people passed through on their way to somewhere better, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and strangers were noticed, discussed, and judged before they tied their horses to a hitching post. So when Caleb Rourke rode into town that September afternoon, the gossip started before he'd finished his business at the general store. By supper time, half of Whispering Creek was talking about the outlaw in their midst. Lydia heard it all as she prepared dinner in the small apartment above the store. The walls were thin, and the Callaways lived next door, and Mrs. Callaway had a voice that could carry across 3 counties. 7 men, she was saying to whoever would listen, shot them all down in the street in Abilene. They say he didn't even blink, just drew and fired like he was shooting tin cans. I heard it was 9 men, someone else countered, and that he did it because they looked at him wrong. Well, I heard he robbed a bank in Dodge City and killed the teller's wife when she tried to stop him. No, it was a stagecoach, and he left the driver for dead. Sarah Mitchell says he's wanted in 5 territories. 5? Try 10. There's paper on him from Kansas to California. Lydia stirred the stew with more force than necessary, her jaw clenched. Every story was worse than the last, each version adding more victims, more violence, more proof that Caleb Rourke was exactly what her father had called him, a cold-blooded killer. But none of them had seen what she'd seen. None of them had watched him cradle a book like it was made of butterfly wings. None of them had heard the grief in his voice when he talked about his sister. None of them had noticed the way he'd kept his hand away from his gun, even when her father had been openly hostile, as if he was determined not to let violence follow him through that door. Don't pay them any mind, her father said quietly from his chair by the window. He'd been reading the same page of the Denver newspaper for 20 minutes. They'll find something else to talk about soon enough. But Lydia wasn't so sure. Whispering Creek was a town starved for excitement, and Caleb Rourke was the most interesting thing to happen here since the Henderson barn burned down last winter. She was proven right the next morning. Lydia was opening the store when Mary Beth Carson came rushing in, her face flushed and her eyes bright with the kind of excitement that only came from knowing something nobody else did yet. "He's staying," Mary Beth announced breathlessly, not bothering with pleasantries. "At the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson says he paid for a week in advance, cash money, and he was polite as Sunday church." Lydia's hands stilled on the crate she'd been unpacking. "A week?" "That's what she said. Can you imagine? An outlaw, just staying here, like he's got nothing to worry about." Mary Beth leaned against the counter, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Sarah's brother heard from Timothy Marsh that there's bounty hunters looking for him. Big money, too. $2,000 dead or alive." $2,000. In a town where most families survived on less than $300 a year, that was a fortune. That was a new life. That was everything. "Mary Beth," Lydia said carefully, "has anyone actually confirmed that he's the Caleb Rourke, the outlaw?" Her friend blinked. "Well, no. But who else would he be? A man who looks like that, rides like that, dressed all in black with a gun on his hip? He's not a schoolteacher, Lydia. He might just be a cowboy or a rancher or—" "You're defending him." Mary Beth's eyes went wide. "Lydia Hartwell, please tell me you're not defending a known killer." "I'm not defending anyone. I'm just saying we don't know anything for certain." But Mary Beth was already shaking her head, backing toward the door, with the kind of scandalized delight that meant this story would be all over town by noon. "Wait until everyone hears that you're taking his side. After he was in here yesterday, oh, Lydia, what were you thinking?" She swept out before Lydia could respond, leaving the bell jangling and silence in her wake. Lydia sank onto the stool behind the counter and pressed her palms against her eyes. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of. In a town this small, perception was reality. And if people thought she was sympathetic to an outlaw, her reputation, carefully maintained through 23 years of proper behavior and appropriate responses, would be destroyed. Her father would never forgive her. The morning dragged on with a steady stream of customers who were suddenly very interested in making purchases at the general store. They came in asking for things they didn't need, lingering by the counter, dropping hints and asking questions that all circled back to the same subject. Did you see him yesterday? What did he buy? Did he seem dangerous? I heard you gave him something. Books, was it? Lydia answered as minimally as possible. Her responses clipped and cold until people stopped asking and started whispering instead. By the time the afternoon stage arrived, she had a headache pounding behind her eyes and a desperate desire to lock the door and hide in her room. Instead, she found herself looking out the window toward the boarding house, wondering what Caleb Rourke was doing in there, wondering why he'd stayed, wondering if he knew the whole town was talking about him, dissecting his every move, building a mythology around him that probably had nothing to do with the truth. The truth. What was the truth about Caleb Rourke? She thought about it all afternoon as she measured flour and counted change and wrapped purchases in brown paper. She thought about it as she swept the floor and updated the ledger and tried not to listen to the whispers that followed her father through town when he went to the post office. And she was still thinking about it when the door opened at 4 o'clock and Caleb Rourke walked in. The store went silent. There were 3 other customers inside: Mrs. Henderson, Mr. Patterson, and young Billy Marsh. All 3 of them froze like rabbits who'd just spotted a wolf. Caleb stopped just inside the door, his hand still on the handle, clearly sensing the tension. His eyes found Lydia's across the room, and she saw something flicker in them. Recognition, maybe, or apology. "I can come back," he said quietly. "No." The word was out before Lydia could stop it. "You're welcome here." Mrs. Henderson made a small sound of disapproval. Mr. Patterson grabbed his purchases and headed for the door, giving Caleb a wide berth. Billy Marsh just stared, his mouth hanging open, until his mother grabbed his arm and dragged him outside. In less than 30 seconds, the store was empty except for Lydia and the outlaw. Caleb moved toward the counter slowly, like he was approaching a spooked horse. "I'm sorry about that," he said. "I heard the talk today. Didn't realize folks would be so uncomfortable." "It's not your fault." Lydia was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Small towns are like this. Any stranger would get the same treatment." His mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "We both know that's not true. But I appreciate the kindness." He set something on the counter between them, the Emerson essays she'd loaned him yesterday. "Already finished?" she asked, surprised. "Couldn't sleep." He touched the book lightly. "It's been a long time since I've read anything beyond trail markers and wanted posters. I forgot how good words could be." There was something raw in his voice, something unguarded. And Lydia felt that same crack in her chest she'd felt yesterday. That dangerous softening toward a man she had no business softening toward. "Keep it," she said. "I meant what I said. It's a loan." "Miss Hartwell." "Lydia." The name escaped before she could think better of it. "If we're going to conduct business, you might as well call me Lydia." He studied her for a long moment, those storm sky eyes searching her face for something she couldn't name. "Then you should call me Caleb. Nobody's called me Mr. Anything in more years than I can count." "Caleb," she repeated, and the name felt strange on her tongue. Intimate, dangerous. "I also came to ask about the other books," he continued. "The Byron and the dime novel. I'd like to purchase them if you're willing to sell, and maybe—" He hesitated and she saw color rise in his face. "Maybe you could recommend a few more?" Lydia's heart did something complicated in her chest. Here was a man with a bounty on his head, staying in a town that feared him, asking for book recommendations like he had all the time in the world. It made no sense, unless he was exactly what she'd suspected yesterday. Not a heartless killer, but someone far more complicated. Someone who'd been pushed into violence but hadn't let it kill the part of him that still loved poetry and philosophy and stories. "I can do that," she said softly. "Give me a moment." She moved to the shelves, very aware of him watching her, very aware of how alone they were. Her father had gone to a town council meeting and wouldn't be back until supper time. The afternoon light slanted through the windows in golden bars, painting everything in amber. Lydia ran her fingers along the spines, considering. What did you give a man like Caleb Rourke? What words would matter to someone who'd seen and done things she couldn't imagine? She pulled down Whitman's Leaves of Grass, a collection of Hawthorne stories, and, after a moment's hesitation, a new novel that had arrived last month from a young writer named Mark Twain. These, she said, setting them on the counter. Whitman, if you want poetry that tastes like America. Hawthorne, if you want shadows and secrets and questions without answers. And Twain, if you want to remember that life can still be funny, even when it's hard. Caleb touched each book in turn, reading the titles, his expression softening. You've read all of these? Most books in this store, yes. It's... She paused, choosing her words carefully. It's how I travel without leaving. How I live more lives than the one I was born into. That's a good reason to read. He looked up at her, and the sadness in his face was almost unbearable. I used to read to escape. Now I read to remember who I was before everything changed. Before everything changed, 4 words that held an entire history. What changed? She asked quietly, knowing she was overstepping, knowing she had no right to ask but unable to stop herself. Caleb was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, My sister, Emma. She was 17. We had a small farm in eastern Colorado. Nothing much, but it was ours. A banker named Silas Benton wanted the land. There was a railroad coming through, and he'd been buying up property to sell to the company at 10 times what he paid. His hands curled into fists on the counter. Emma refused to sell. It was our home, she said. Our parents were buried there. She wouldn't let it go for any amount of money. His voice went flat, emotionless. So Benton hired men to convince her. They came one night while I was in town getting supplies. When I got back, the house was burning. Emma was inside. Lydia's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, God. The sheriff said it was an accident, a lamp knocked over. But I knew better. Emma was terrified of fire. She never would have been careless. He looked down at his clenched fists. I went to Benton. I had proof, witnesses who'd seen his men near the farm that night. I begged the law to investigate. They said there wasn't enough evidence. That a man like Benton wouldn't do something like that over a piece of land. But you knew the truth, Lydia whispered. I knew. His voice was deadly quiet. So I did what the law wouldn't. I found the men he'd hired. I gave them a choice, confess and face a judge, or face me. 2 of them ran. 3 of them chose to draw. I made sure the last one lived long enough to tell the sheriff everything. And Benton? Disappeared before I could reach him. Probably in Mexico now, living on blood money. Caleb's eyes met hers, and she saw no apology in them, no shame. I don't regret what I did. Those men killed my sister. They took the only family I had left, and the world they built their lives on, believing that men like Benton are untouchable, that girls like Emma don't matter. I couldn't let that stand. Lydia understood then. The wanted posters, the bounties, the whispered stories, they all came from that one act of grief-fueled justice. And everything after had been running, surviving, becoming the legend he'd never wanted to be. You're not a killer, she said softly. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've killed men, Lydia. That makes me a killer by definition. You're not what they say you are, she corrected. There's a difference between murder and justice, between cruelty and what? He leaned forward slightly. What would you call it? Love, she said simply. You loved your sister. Everything you did came from that. The word hung between them like a bridge or maybe a blade, dangerous either way. Caleb shook his head slowly. Love that leads to violence isn't love. It's human, Lydia interrupted. It's human, Caleb. You're not some monster. You're a man who lost everything and tried to find justice when the world wouldn't give it to you. A man the law wants to hang, he reminded her. A man worth $2,000 to anyone desperate enough to try collecting. A man who brings nothing but trouble to anyone foolish enough to be seen with him. There was warning in his voice. A clear message. Stay away. But Lydia had spent 5 years being careful, 5 years following rules, 5 years building a safe, small life in the shadow of her father's fear, and she was so very tired of being safe. The Byron and the dime novel are 50 cents each, she said, deliberately changing the subject. The others are yours to keep. Consider them a gift. Lydia, you need them more than I do right now. She pushed the books toward him. And besides, I'm curious to know what you think of Twain. He's a new voice, different from anything else I've read. Caleb studied her for a long moment, and she saw him making a decision, whether to argue or accept, whether to maintain distance or allow this small connection. Finally, he pulled out a silver dollar and set it on the counter. For the 2 books, and for whatever trouble I've caused you by coming here. I heard what people were saying today. About you. Shame heated her cheeks. What were they saying? That you were foolish for giving me books, that you didn't understand the danger, that your father should watch you more carefully. His voice gentled. They're not wrong, Lydia. You should be careful around me. I draw trouble like lightning draws storms. Then I'll buy an umbrella, she said lightly, surprising herself. That pulled a real smile from him, small and brief, but genuine. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges, making him look younger and more open. For just a moment, she could see the man he might have been if his sister had lived, if justice had been served, if the world had been kinder. You're something else, he said quietly. In a town that wants me gone, you're the only one who's treated me like a person instead of a threat. Maybe that's because I see you differently than they do. Or maybe you're not seeing clearly at all. It should have felt like rejection. Instead, it felt like protection, like he was trying to save her from himself, from the consequences of caring about someone the world had already condemned. But Lydia had grown up reading Shakespeare and Dante and Bronte. She knew how these stories went. She knew that the greatest loves were always complicated, always difficult, always condemned by the world that witnessed them. And she was beginning to suspect that she was already in one of those stories, whether she wanted to be or not. Come back tomorrow, she said impulsively. I'll have more recommendations ready. Caleb gathered his books, tucking them into his duster with care. I shouldn't. But you will? He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the war happening behind his eyes. Duty versus desire, safety versus risk, loneliness versus connection. I probably will, he admitted finally. God help us both. Then he tipped his hat and walked out into the afternoon sun, leaving Lydia alone with her racing heart and the growing certainty that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't predict or control. And for the first time in 5 years, she wasn't afraid of that. She was ready. Caleb came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Each time, he arrived in the late afternoon when the store was quietest, when most of Whispering Creek was home preparing supper and the shadows were growing long across the floorboards. Each time he returned a book and took a new one. Each time he stayed a little longer, and each time the talk in town grew louder. Lydia felt it everywhere she went. The way conversation stopped when she entered the mercantile down the street, the way women pulled their children closer when she passed on the boardwalk, the way men looked at her father with something between pity and judgment, as if Thomas Hartwell had failed some fundamental test of fatherhood by not controlling his daughter better. Her father felt it too. He grew quieter each evening, his face drawn and tired, his eyes avoiding hers across the dinner table. You're going to ruin us, he said finally, 1 week after Caleb Rourke had ridden into town. They were closing up the store, pulling down the shades, counting the day's earnings. It had been a slow day, slower than usual. Several regular customers had made excuses about why they needed to take their business elsewhere for a while. I'm not doing anything wrong, Lydia said, her hand steady as she recorded the numbers in the ledger. I'm selling books to a customer, that's all. That's all? Her father's voice rose, sharp with frustration. Lydia, wake up. That man is poison. Everything he touches turns to ashes, and you're standing there acting like he's just another traveler passing through. Maybe he is. He's an outlaw. Thomas slammed his palm on the counter, making the coins jump. Wanted for murder. Worth $2,000 to anyone brave enough or desperate enough to try claiming it. And you're giving him books and smiling at him and... He broke off, running his hand through his white hair. Your mother would be horrified. That struck deep, deeper than anything else he could have said. Lydia felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to let him see how much it hurt. Mama would have understood, she said quietly. She was the one who taught me to see people, not just their reputations. She was the one who said that mercy matters more than judgment. Your mother is dead. The words were brutal, final. And I won't lose you too because you've romanticized some outlaw into something he's not. This stops now, Lydia. No more books. No more conversations. If Caleb Rourke walks through that door again, you tell him we're closed. Papa, I mean it. His voice cracked. I can't lose you. I can't bury another woman I love. So you'll do as I say, or I'll sell this store and we'll move back east where you can't get yourself killed over some misguided notion of charity. He left her standing there in the dimming light, his footsteps heavy on the stairs to their apartment above. Lydia pressed her palms flat against the counter, trying to steady her breathing. She understood her father's fear. She did. But understanding didn't make it any easier to bear. Thomas Hartwell had let his grief turn him into someone small and frightened, someone who saw danger in every shadow and built walls instead of bridges. And Lydia couldn't live like that. Wouldn't live like that. She thought of her mother reading by candlelight, her voice soft and sure as she recited her favorite passage from Measure for Measure. The miserable have no other medicine but only hope. What was Caleb Rourke but miserable? What was he seeking in those books, if not medicine, if not hope? And what kind of person would she be if she denied him that because the world had decided he didn't deserve it? The next afternoon, Caleb arrived at his usual time. Through the window, Lydia watched him approach, noting the way he moved, careful, alert, his hand never far from his gun. He tied his horse and paused on the boardwalk, looking up at the store sign as if steeling himself for something difficult. Then he pushed through the door, and his eyes found hers immediately. Afternoon, he said, pulling off his hat. The store was empty, deliberately so. Her father had left an hour ago, claiming business at the bank, though Lydia suspected he just couldn't bear to watch another encounter. The silence felt heavy, expectant. Caleb? She couldn't quite manage a smile. I have to tell you something. He went still, reading her expression. Your father? He forbade me from serving you. The words came out flat, honest. Said if you came back, I should tell you we're closed. Something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or resignation. He'd probably expected this, probably been waiting for it since that first day. I understand, he said quietly. I'll go. I didn't say I was going to listen to him. Caleb's head snapped up. Lydia, I'm 23 years old, she continued, her voice stronger now. I've spent 5 years being the perfect daughter, following every rule, never causing trouble. And for what? So I can live half a life? So I can let fear make all my decisions? She shook her head. My mother didn't raise me to be a coward. Keeping yourself safe isn't cowardice. Refusing to see someone's humanity because the world tells me I should, that's cowardice. She moved toward the bookshelves, selecting a volume she'd set aside that morning. Thoreau, Civil Disobedience. I thought you might appreciate it. Caleb didn't take the book. Instead, he set the one he'd been returning, the Hawthorne stories, on the counter and took a step back. You can't do this, he said, and there was something raw in his voice. You don't understand what you're risking. This town already thinks poorly of you because of me. Your father is terrified. And for what? So I can borrow books for a few more days before I move on? Is that what you're planning to do? Move on. The question hung between them, weighted with things neither of them had said aloud. I was, Caleb admitted, but I've stayed longer than I should have, longer than is safe. His eyes searched her face. Do you want to know why? Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. Yes. Because for the first time in 3 years, I've remembered what it feels like to be treated like a human being instead of a monster. Because you look at me like I'm someone worth knowing, not just someone worth hanging. Because every time I walk through that door, I forget for a few minutes that I'm a wanted man with no future and nothing to offer anyone. He took a breath. And that's dangerous, Lydia. Not just for me, but for you. Because I'm starting to care what happens to you, and men like me don't get to care. We don't get to stay. We don't get to... He stopped himself, but Lydia heard what he didn't say. We don't get to love. Then maybe you should stop being men like you, she said softly. Maybe you should be just Caleb, just a man who reads poetry and thinks about his sister and wants something more than running. You make it sound simple. I know it's not simple, but it could be possible, if you wanted it badly enough. Caleb laughed, but it was a broken sound. What are you suggesting? That I should settle down in Whispering Creek? Open a bookshop? The town already hates me, Lydia, and the bounty hunters are coming. They always come. Then leave town, she said, surprising herself with the words. Find somewhere you can start over, somewhere the past doesn't matter. There is no such place. Not for me. He picked up his hat, turning it in his hands. I should go. This was a mistake, all of it. I never should have walked into this store. Never should have let myself... He trailed off again, and Lydia felt something crack inside her chest. Let yourself what? She pressed. Feel something? Hope for something? Be something other than the legend they've made you? Yes! The word came out harsh, almost angry. Because that's all I am now, Lydia. A story people tell to scare their children. A name on a wanted poster. A dead man walking. And the sooner you accept that, the safer you'll be. He turned toward the door, and Lydia felt panic rise in her throat. If he left now, he wouldn't come back. She knew it with bone-deep certainty. He'd ride out of Whispering Creek and disappear into whatever life he'd carved out for himself in the shadows, and she'd never know what might have been possible between them. My mother died 5 years ago, she said, her voice stopping him mid-step. Consumption. She wasted away over 6 months, getting thinner and paler until she was barely there anymore. The last thing she said to me was, don't be afraid to love loudly, Lydia, even when the world tells you to be quiet. Caleb stood with his back to her, his shoulders rigid. I didn't understand what she meant then, Lydia continued. I thought she was talking about romance, about finding a husband, but she wasn't. She was talking about living with your whole heart, about refusing to let fear make you small, about choosing connection even when it's risky, even when it hurts, even when everyone tells you you're being foolish. She took a breath, steadying herself. So maybe I am being foolish. Maybe I'm risking my reputation and my relationship with my father and my safety for something that can't possibly work. But for the first time in 5 years, I feel alive. I feel like I'm honoring what my mother taught me, and I won't apologize for that. Slowly, Caleb turned to face her. His eyes were bright with something that looked like tears, though his face remained carefully composed. You deserve better than this, he said hoarsely. Better than me. That's not your decision to make. They stared at each other across the space of the store, and Lydia felt the air crackle between them with all the things they weren't saying. She saw in his face what he was trying so hard not to show her, loneliness, longing, and something dangerously close to love. Just take the book, she said finally, holding out the Thoreau again. Please. After a long moment, Caleb crossed back to her and took it. His fingers brushed hers, and this time neither of them pulled away. The touch lasted only seconds, but felt infinite. Thank you, he whispered. Then he was gone, the bell jingling softly behind him, and Lydia was alone with her racing heart and the growing certainty that she'd just crossed a line there was no uncrossing. She didn't regret it. That evening, Mary Beth Carson came to the store just as Lydia was closing up. Her friend's face was flushed with either excitement or concern. With Mary Beth, it was always hard to tell which. I came to warn you, she said, not bothering with preamble. Jack Morrison and his brother rode in from Denver today. They're staying at the saloon, asking questions about Caleb Rourke. Lydia's stomach dropped. What kind of questions? Where he's staying, what his routine is, whether he's alone. Mary Beth grabbed her hands. They're bounty hunters, Lydia, and they're not subtle about it. Half the town knows why they're here. Did anyone tell them about the boarding house? Not yet, but it's only a matter of time. Her friend's voice softened. You should stay away from him now. I know you've been kind to him, but these Morrison brothers, they're dangerous. They don't care who gets caught in the crossfire. Lydia pulled her hands free, her mind racing. I have to warn him. Absolutely not. Mary Beth's eyes went wide. Lydia, think about what you're saying. If you go to him now, everyone will know. Your father will know. And if something happens, if there's violence, you could be seen as an accomplice. I don't care. Yes, you do. You just think you don't because you've convinced yourself that outlaw is something he's not. Mary Beth's voice turned pleading. He's not some romantic hero from your books, Lydia. He's a killer. And the sooner he's gone from this town, the better off we'll all be. Get out, Lydia said quietly. What? Get out of my store. She moved to the door, holding it open. And don't come back until you're ready to apologize for calling me a fool. Mary Beth's face crumpled. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protecting. I need friends who trust my judgment and support my choices even when they don't understand them. Lydia's voice wavered but held firm. Now leave, please. Her friend left without another word, and Lydia locked the door behind her with shaking hands. Through the window, she could see the sun setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire and blood. Bounty hunters. Here, now, looking for Caleb. She should leave it alone, should let events unfold as they would. Caleb Rourke was a grown man who'd survived 3 years on the run. He didn't need her interference, but the thought of him walking into an ambush, of him dying in some dirty street because she'd stayed silent out of fear or propriety, that was unbearable. Lydia pulled her shawl from its peg and slipped out the back door. The boarding house was only 3 blocks away, but she took a circuitous route, cutting through alleys and staying in the shadows. The evening air was cool, carrying the smell of wood smoke and cooking meat. Through windows, she could see families gathered for supper, warm and safe and ordinary. She'd never felt less ordinary in her life. Mrs. Patterson answered her knock with a suspicious frown. Miss Hartwell, it's past visiting hours. I need to speak with one of your guests. Mr. Rourke, it's urgent. The older woman's expression hardened. That man has brought nothing but trouble to my establishment. I've half a mind to... Please. Lydia pulled out a $5 bill, nearly a week's wages from the store. For your trouble and your discretion. Mrs. Patterson snatched the money and stepped aside. Room 7, upstairs, end of the hall, but you didn't hear it from me. Lydia climbed the narrow stairs, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. What was she doing? This was madness. If anyone saw her, if anyone found out she'd gone to a man's room unchaperoned. She knocked before she could talk herself out of it. The door opened immediately, and Caleb stood there in his shirt sleeves, his gun already in his hand. When he saw her, shock replaced wariness. Lydia, what the hell? He grabbed her arm and pulled her inside, shutting the door quickly. Do you have any idea how dangerous this is? If anyone sees you here... Bounty hunters, she interrupted breathlessly. 2 of them, the Morrison brothers. They're at the saloon asking about you. Caleb's jaw tightened. I know. You know? I've known since they rode into town this afternoon. I was planning to leave tonight. He holstered his gun and began gathering his few possessions, a bedroll, saddlebags, the books she'd loaned him. Which is why you shouldn't have come. It's not safe. For you? Or for me? Both. He didn't look at her, his movements quick and efficient. The Morrisons don't play fair. They're known for burning down buildings to flush out their targets, for taking hostages. If they think you matter to me, do I? The question escaped before she could stop it. Caleb went still, his hands frozen on the buckle of his saddlebag. For a long moment, the only sound was their breathing and the distant noise from the saloon below. Yes, he said finally, turning to face her. God help me, yes. Which is why you need to go home and forget you ever knew me. I can't do that. Then you're braver than I am. He crossed to her in 3 strides, taking her shoulders in his hands. Listen to me. Once I'm gone, the Morrisons will leave too. They have no interest in this town or anyone in it. You'll be safe. But you won't be. I stopped being safe 3 years ago. His voice was gentle but firm. This is my life now, Lydia. Running, hiding, always looking over my shoulder. And I won't drag you into it. What if I want to be dragged? The words hung between them, too big and too honest. Caleb's eyes searched her face, and she saw the war happening behind them. Desire versus duty, hope versus reality. His hands tightened on her shoulders, and for one breathless moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped back, releasing her. "You don't know what you're asking for," he said, hoarsely. "You think you do, but you don't. Life on the run isn't romantic. It's cold camps and hunger and never sleeping deeply because you don't know who might find you. It's watching every stranger, trusting no one, being ready to fight or flee at a moment's notice. It's lonely," she finished. "It's lonely, Caleb, and maybe it doesn't have to be." "Yes, it does." His voice broke slightly. "Because everyone I've ever cared about ends up hurt or worse. My sister. The few friends I had before this started. Even the lawman who tried to help me. They found him in an alley in Kansas City with 3 bullets in him because he'd been seen talking to me." He looked away. "I'm poison, Lydia. Everything I touch dies." "That's not true." "It is." He grabbed his saddlebags and slung them over his shoulder. "And someday, when you're married to some nice shopkeeper or rancher, and you have children and a safe, normal life, you'll be grateful I had the strength to walk away tonight." Lydia felt tears burning her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Is that really what you think I want? Safe and normal?" "It's what you deserve." "Stop telling me what I deserve." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, anger cutting through her grief. "You don't get to make that choice for me, Caleb Rourke. You don't get to decide that I'm too fragile or too naive or too good for your life. That's my decision to make. Then make the smart one." He moved toward the door, his face hard. "Go home. Forget about me. Live your life." "I can't forget about you." The word stopped him with his hand on the doorknob. His shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath, and when he turned back, his expression was carefully blank. "You'll have to try." Then he was gone, leaving Lydia alone in the small room with her tears and her rage and the terrible, aching certainty that she'd just lost something precious before she'd ever really had the chance to hold it. She sank onto the edge of the bed, pressing her palms against her eyes. This was foolish. Mary Beth was right. She was being foolish. She'd known this man for barely a week. She had no business feeling this destroyed by his leaving, but her heart didn't care about business or sense or the proper timeline for developing feelings. Her heart only knew that for the first time since her mother died, she'd felt truly seen by another person. For the first time, she'd felt brave instead of careful, alive instead of just existing. And now that feeling was walking out of town on a black gelding, heading toward a future that had no room for her. Lydia straightened, wiping her eyes. She couldn't stay here. Someone would see her, would talk, and her father would... A crash from downstairs shattered her thoughts. Then shouting, the kind that preceded violence. She rushed to the window and looked down into the street. The Morrison brothers were there. She recognized them from Mary Beth's description. 2 large men with hard faces and harder eyes, both armed with rifles. They were backing toward their horses, and behind them, Sheriff Elias Boone lay in the street, blood spreading across his shirt. "Rourke was here," one of the brothers was yelling. "Patterson saw him leave 10 minutes ago, heading east." The other one swung onto his horse. "Then we ride east. Move!" They spurred their horses and galloped out of town, leaving chaos in their wake. People poured out of buildings surrounding the fallen sheriff. Someone was screaming for the doctor. Lydia didn't think. She ran down the stairs, pushed through Mrs. Patterson's protests, and sprinted toward the crowd. Doctor. Winters was already there, kneeling beside Sheriff Boone, his hands pressing a wadded cloth against the wound. "What happened?" Lydia demanded, pushing through to the front. "Those bastard bounty hunters," someone said. "Sheriff tried to stop them from storming the boarding house. They shot him." "Is he alive?" Dr. Winters said grimly. "But he needs surgery, and I need help." "Miss Hartwell, you've assisted me before. Can you—" "Yes." She was already pulling off her shawl, already moving to help lift the sheriff onto the makeshift stretcher someone had brought. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of blood and whispered prayers and the steady focus that came from having a task that mattered more than her own pain. She held instruments, cleaned wounds, kept pressure where Dr. Winters told her to, and tried not to think about Caleb riding east with 2 killers on his trail. When it was over and Sheriff Boone was sleeping fitfully in the doctor's back room, his wife sitting vigil beside him, Lydia walked home through streets gone quiet and dark. Her dress was ruined, her hands stained, her mind numb with exhaustion and fear. Her father was waiting on the porch, his face pale in the lamplight. "I heard what happened," he said quietly. "Mrs. Patterson said you were there, that you helped with the sheriff." "He'll live," Lydia said, unable to meet his eyes. "Dr. Winters says he'll live." "That's good." Thomas Hartwell was silent for a moment. "He also said you were at the boarding house before it happened, that you went to warn Rourke about the bounty hunters." Lydia looked up sharply, but her father's face held no anger, only weariness and something that might have been resignation. "I did," she admitted. "I couldn't let him walk into an ambush without warning. Even though I forbade it, even though it meant defying me. Even though—" Her father nodded slowly. "You're so much like your mother. She never could stand by and watch injustice happen either. It's what made me fall in love with her." He sighed. "It's also what worried me every single day. Because courage like that, love like that, it's dangerous, Lydia. It burns bright, but it can burn you to ashes." "I know, Papa." "Do you?" He stepped closer, his eyes searching her face. "Because from where I'm standing, you're already halfway to falling for that outlaw, and I don't know how to protect you from that." Lydia felt fresh tears threaten. "You can't protect me from it. I don't want you to." "Even if it destroys you?" "Even then." She took his hands. "Mama used to say that the heart knows things the head can never understand." I didn't believe her. I thought that was just romantic nonsense. But Papa, when I'm with Caleb, when we talk, it's like something in me recognizes something in him. Like we're speaking the same language everyone else has forgotten. Thomas Hartwell's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "That's how I felt about your mother. The first time I met her, I knew. I knew she was going to change my life." "And did you regret it? Even when she got sick? Even when you watched her fade?" "Not for 1 second." His voice was fierce. "Not for 1 single second, Lydia. And when she died, I thought the answer was to never love like that again. To keep everything small and safe so it couldn't hurt me. But all I did was make my life smaller. All I did was disappoint the woman who'd chosen me because I was brave enough to build a life in the wilderness." He pulled her into a hug, and Lydia clung to him, breathing in the familiar smell of pipe tobacco and ink. "If this is what you want," he said quietly, "if this is what your heart is telling you, then I won't stand in your way anymore. But please, please be careful, because I couldn't bear to lose you too." "I will," she promised, knowing even as she said it that careful wasn't really possible anymore. They stood there on the porch as the night deepened around them, father and daughter, both loving and being loved by people who'd chosen difficult paths, both learning that sometimes wisdom looked a lot like foolishness to everyone watching from the outside. The gunfire came 3 days later. Lydia was sweeping the store's porch when she heard it, a distant crack, crack, crack that echoed off the mountains. Her heart seized. Everyone in town knew what that meant. The bounty hunters had found their target. She dropped the broom and ran toward the sound, her skirts hiked up around her knees, propriety forgotten. Other people were emerging from buildings, drawn by the noise, but Lydia was faster. She'd always been fast. Her mother used to say she ran like someone chasing the wind. The shooting was coming from behind the saloon, near the old livery stable that hadn't been used in years. Lydia skidded around the corner and froze. Caleb was backed against the stable wall, his gun in his hand, facing off against both Morrison brothers. One of them was bleeding from his shoulder, his rifle on the ground. The other had his pistol trained on Caleb's chest. "Drop it, Rourke," the uninjured one was saying. "You're worth the same dead or alive, and I'm getting tired of your games." "Then shoot me and be done with it," Caleb said calmly. "But I'm not dropping my gun." "Your choice." Morrison's finger tightened on the trigger. Lydia didn't think. She grabbed an old shovel leaning against the building and swung it as hard as she could at a stack of metal feed pans beside the saloon's back door. The crash was enormous, echoing like thunder, and both Morrison brothers whirled toward the sound. It gave Caleb the opening he needed. He moved like lightning, disarming one brother with a sharp kick and leveling his gun at the other. "Now drop yours," he said quietly. Morrison hesitated, then let his pistol fall. "This ain't over, Rourke." "Yes, it is." Sheriff Boone's voice came from behind Lydia. She turned to see him leaning heavily on a crutch. his wife supporting his other side, but his gun hand was steady. "You boys are under arrest." "For what?" Morrison spat. "He's wanted. We're bounty hunters. We're within our rights." "You shot a lawman," Boone said flatly, "and you just tried to gun down a man in cold blood without giving him a chance to surrender. That's attempted murder, and I'm charging you with it. Now get your brother and march yourselves to my jail, or I'll shoot you where you stand." The Morrison brothers looked at each other, then at Caleb, then back at the sheriff. Finally, the uninjured one helped his bleeding brother to his feet, and they walked slowly toward the main street, Sheriff Boone and his wife following behind. That left Lydia and Caleb alone in the dusty space behind the buildings. He holstered his gun slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "You saved my life. You would have found a way," she said, her voice shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "No." He crossed to her in 3 long strides. "I wouldn't have. They had me dead to rights. If you hadn't made that noise—" He broke off, his hands coming up to frame her face. "What were you thinking? They could have shot you." "I was thinking that I couldn't watch you die. Lydia." Her name was half prayer, half curse. "You're going to be the death of me, or the saving of me. I'm not sure which yet." Then he kissed her. It was nothing like the kisses in the novels she'd read, those careful, chaste pressings of lips that seemed more symbolic than real. This was heat and hunger, and 3 years of loneliness pouring out of him into her. His hands slid from her face into her hair, scattering pins, and she grabbed his shirt to keep from falling. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I tried to leave you," he whispered. "I rode for 2 hours, got halfway to Boulder, and couldn't do it. Couldn't keep going knowing I'd never see you again. So I came back to tell you, to ask you." "Ask me what?" He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "To wait for me. I'm going to Denver. Sheriff Boone says the banker, Benton, he's been arrested. They found evidence of fraud, bribery, all kinds of corruption. The case against him is solid, and if I testify, they might consider reducing my charges or even pardoning me." His voice was urgent. "It could take months, maybe longer. But if there's a chance, if there's even the smallest possibility that I could come back to you as a free man instead of a wanted one, I'll wait," Lydia said immediately. "I'll wait as long as it takes. You don't know what you're promising." "Yes, I do." She grabbed his face, making him look at her. "I know exactly what I'm promising. I'm promising to believe in you when no one else does. I'm promising to hold on to hope even when it seems impossible. I'm promising to be here when you come back. And if I don't come back, then I'll come find you." She smiled through her tears. "You're not getting rid of me that easily, Caleb Rourke." He laughed, a real laugh, bright and unguarded, and kissed her again, gentler this time, but no less profound. "I don't deserve you," he murmured against her lips. "Probably not," she agreed, "but you're stuck with me anyway." "Lydia," her father's voice carried across the yard. "Are you—" He rounded the corner and stopped short, taking in the scene. Caleb immediately stepped back, putting proper distance between them, but Thomas Hartwell just shook his head slowly. "I see. Well, that explains a few things. Papa, I can explain—" "No need." He walked closer, his eyes on Caleb. "I'm not going to pretend I'm happy about this. I'm not going to pretend I understand it. But my daughter has never been wrong about people. And if she sees something in you worth believing in," he extended his hand, "then I'm willing to try doing the same." Caleb stared at the offered hand like it was something holy. Then he took it, his grip firm. "I'll be worthy of her," he said quietly. "I swear it." "See that you are." Thomas released his hand and turned to Lydia. "Now come along. We have a store to run, and apparently a reputation to rebuild. And you," he pointed at Caleb, "you should probably get to Denver before those Morrison brothers decide jail won't hold them." Caleb nodded. "I'll leave at first light." "Then we'll say our goodbyes now," Thomas said gruffly. "In front of witnesses, properly." But there was a glint of humor in his eyes as he added, "Though I suspect that horse already left the barn." He walked away, giving them privacy, and Lydia turned back to Caleb. "Thank you for coming back," she whispered. "Thank you for being worth coming back to." He tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I'll write. As soon as I know something, I'll write." I'll be waiting. They stood there in the fading afternoon light, holding each other, neither wanting to be the first to let go. Around them, Whispering Creek was returning to normal, people heading home for supper, shops closing for the evening, the mountains casting their long shadows across the valley. But for Lydia and Caleb, everything had changed. The foolish girl and the outlaw, with nothing to lose, had found something neither of them had been looking for. They'd found hope. And maybe, just maybe, they'd found the beginning of love. Caleb rode out at dawn, just as he'd promised, and Lydia watched him go from her bedroom window. The sun was painting the mountains gold, and he sat tall in the saddle, looking back once before the road curved and took him from her sight. She pressed her hand against the glass, feeling the cold seep through, and told herself this wasn't goodbye. It was just waiting, just hope stretched thin across distance and time. The first week passed slowly. Lydia threw herself into work at the store, reorganizing shelves that didn't need reorganizing, cleaning corners that were already clean, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spinning out into worry. Her father watched her with a mixture of concern and understanding, saying nothing but occasionally squeezing her shoulder as he passed. The town's reaction to recent events was mixed and complicated. Some people, the ones who'd seen Sheriff Boone nearly die, who'd watched the Morrison brothers terrorize their streets, had shifted their opinion of Caleb Rourke. If the bounty hunters were that vicious, maybe the outlaw wasn't as bad as the stories made him out to be. Maybe there was more to the tale than they'd heard. But others doubled down on their judgment, and Lydia bore the brunt of it. Shameless, Mrs. Henderson muttered loudly enough to be heard when Lydia walked past the church. Throwing herself at a criminal, her mother would be horrified. I heard she went to his room, another voice whispered. Unchaperoned, at night. What kind of decent girl? The kind who doesn't know her place, Mrs. Henderson finished. Mark my words, she'll regret this. Girls like that always do. Lydia kept her head high and her face composed, but each comment was a small cut, and by the end of that first week, she felt like she was bleeding from 1,000 invisible wounds. Only Mary Beth's tearful apology on the 8th day gave her any relief. I was wrong, her friend said, standing in the store with red-rimmed eyes. I was scared and judgmental, and I didn't trust you, but I watched you help Dr. Winters save Sheriff Boone's life. I saw how brave you were, and I realized that you see things the rest of us miss. You always have. She grabbed Lydia's hands. So if you say Caleb Rourke is worth believing in, then I believe you. And I'll tell anyone who says otherwise that they're wrong. It wasn't much, but it was something. A crack in the wall of disapproval. A single voice of support in a chorus of condemnation. The letter arrived on the 14th day. Lydia was sorting mail when she saw it. Her name in unfamiliar handwriting, postmarked from Denver. Her hands shook as she opened it, not caring that her father and 2 customers were watching. The words were brief but precious. Lydia, I'm alive and safe. The trial is set for next month. The prosecutor says my testimony is crucial. He also says there's precedent for pardoning witnesses who cooperate in cases of corruption. It's not a guarantee, but it's a chance. That's more than I've had in 3 years. I think of you every morning and every night. The space between is just waiting until I can do both at the same time. Stay strong, stay safe. And know that you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever, a reason to hope for tomorrow. Yours, Caleb. She read it 3 times, memorizing every word, every loop of his handwriting, every place where the ink had pressed deeper as if he'd paused to think. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her bodice, close to her heart. Good news? Her father asked quietly. The best, she whispered. More letters came over the following weeks. They arrived irregularly, sometimes 2 in 1 week, sometimes none for 10 days, but each one was a lifeline. Caleb wrote about Denver, about the lawyers and their endless questions, about the evidence mounting against Silas Benton. He wrote about the boarding house where he was staying, run by a widow who'd lost her son to injustice and understood his need for redemption. He wrote about the books he was reading, the thoughts they sparked, the way he kept returning to a line from Thoreau. Rather than love, than money, than fame, give me truth. I'm learning what truth means, he wrote in early November. Not just facts, but the deeper truth of who we are and what we're meant to be. And my truth is this. I was lost until I met you. Every choice I made after Emma died was about survival. about keeping one step ahead of the past. But you made me want to build a future instead. You made me want to be someone worthy of being loved. That's the truth I'm fighting for now. Not just freedom, but the right to come back to you as a whole man instead of a broken one. Lydia kept every letter in a wooden box her mother had brought from Boston. At night, when the store was closed and the town was sleeping, she would take them out and read them by candlelight, tracing the words with her fingers, imagining his voice speaking them. She wrote back faithfully, filling pages with news from Whispering Creek. She told him about the early snow that came in October, about the traveling photographer who'd set up shop for a week and taken portraits of half the town, about the new school teacher who'd arrived from St. Louis with radical ideas about educating girls alongside boys. She told him about her father slowly warming to the idea of them, about Mary Beth becoming her fierce defender, about the way Sheriff Boone's recovery had changed some minds about what bravery really meant. She also told him about the hard parts, about the women who still crossed the street to avoid her, about the whispers that followed her into church, about the visiting minister who'd preached a sermon on Jezebel and looked directly at her while doing it. Let them talk, Caleb wrote back. Small minds will always fear what they don't understand. But you and I, we understand something they've forgotten, that love requires courage, that real wisdom often looks like foolishness to those who've never risked anything. Keep being brave, Lydia. Keep being you. Because that woman, the one who faced down bounty hunters with a shovel, who defied her father to loan books to an outlaw, who kissed me like she wasn't afraid of anything, that woman is my whole world. Winter settled over Colorado with brutal efficiency. The mountains disappeared behind walls of snow, and Whispering Creek hunkered down to wait out the cold months. Travel became difficult, then impossible, as the passes closed and the roads froze solid. The mail came sporadically, carried by hardy riders who charged premium rates for the risk. Lydia's last letter from Caleb arrived 3 days before Christmas. The trial is finally starting, he wrote. It's been delayed twice because of Benton's lawyers filing motions, but the judge has run out of patience. We're beginning January 2nd. The prosecutor is confident, but I'm trying not to hope too hard. I've learned that hope can be as dangerous as it is necessary. But then I think of you, and I can't help it. I hope anyway. If this works, if I walk out of that courtroom a free man, I'm coming straight back to Whispering Creek. I don't care if it's the middle of winter. I don't care if I have to walk every mile through snow. I'm coming back to you. Wait for me a little longer, Lydia. Please. I know I'm asking for more than I deserve, but I'm asking anyway. Wait for me. She held that letter against her chest and cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of loving someone so completely while being so powerless to help them. All she could do was wait and pray and try to believe that justice would prevail. Christmas came and went. The new year arrived with a brutal cold snap that froze the creek solid and kept everyone indoors except when absolutely necessary. Lydia marked off days on her calendar, counting toward January 2nd, imagining what was happening in Denver. The opening arguments, the testimony, Caleb standing before a judge and jury, his fate in the hands of 12 strangers. 3 weeks passed with no word, then 4. By mid-February, Lydia was starting to fracture. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, could barely focus on anything except the mail rider's schedule. Every day without a letter felt like a small death. Her father tried to comfort her, but what could he say? They both knew what silence might mean, a guilty verdict, a hanging, or worse, something so terrible that Caleb couldn't bring himself to write about it. He'll send word, Thomas insisted. The passes are still mostly closed. Mail is slow. Don't borrow trouble, my girl. But trouble didn't need to be borrowed. It was already there, sitting heavy on Lydia's chest, making every breath feel like work. The letter finally arrived on February 23rd. Lydia saw the rider coming from her window and ran downstairs so fast she nearly fell. She met him at the door, and he handed over a thick envelope with a knowing smile. From Denver, he said. Looks important. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely break the seal. The letter was longer than usual, multiple pages covered in Caleb's handwriting. She forced herself to slow down, to read carefully, even though her heart was racing. Lydia, I'm free. Those 3 words, those impossible, beautiful, perfect 3 words. She had to stop reading and sit down, the relief so intense it made her dizzy. Her father rushed over, alarmed, but she just shook her head and kept reading. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Benton's lawyers tried everything: character assassination, procedural delays, attempts to discredit me as a witness. But the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecutor had documents, testimonies from other victims, even a confession from one of the men Benton hired. When the jury convicted him on all counts, I actually felt Emma's presence, like she was finally at rest. The judge sentenced Benton to 20 years in territorial prison. He'll die there, old and forgotten, and there's justice in that. But the best part, the part I still can't quite believe, is what happened after. The prosecutor filed a motion for my pardon, citing my cooperation and the circumstances surrounding my actions. He argued that I'd acted in pursuit of justice when the law failed, and that I'd shown remorse and rehabilitation. The judge agreed. "Lydia," the judge agreed, "I'm officially pardoned for all charges related to Emma's death. The slate is clean. I'm free." Lydia pressed the letter to her lips, tears streaming down her face. Her father read over her shoulder, and she heard him make a choked sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. But there was more. "I'm not coming back to Whispering Creek," Caleb continued, and Lydia's heart stopped. "At least not immediately. I know that's not what you want to hear, but please let me explain. I've spent 3 years running, surviving, barely living. I've been defined by what I lost and what I did in response. But now I have a chance to build something new, to become someone new. And I want to do that right. I've bought land outside Boulder, 50 acres with a creek running through it and mountains on 3 sides. It's raw land, undeveloped, but it has potential. I'm going to build a ranch. Nothing fancy, but honest work, clean work. The kind of life Emma would have wanted for me, the kind of life I want to offer you. So I'm asking you to wait just a little longer. Give me 3 months to build a house, to establish something solid, to create a foundation worthy of you. Then, if you're still willing, if you haven't changed your mind, if your father will give his blessing, come to me. Come be my wife. Come build this life with me. I know it's asking a lot. I know 3 months feels like forever after we've already waited so long. But I want to do this right, Lydia. I want to court you properly, to marry you with your father's approval, to give you a home that's more than just walls and a roof. I want to give you the life you deserve, yours forever, if you'll have me, Caleb." She read the last paragraph 3 times, making sure she understood correctly. He was proposing, not in person, not on one knee with a ring, but in ink and paper and promises stretched across miles. He was asking her to wait 3 more months and then to come to him, to leave Whispering Creek, to leave her father, to leave everything familiar and build something entirely new with a man she'd known for barely 2 weeks before he'd ridden out of her life. It was madness. It was also the easiest decision she'd ever made. "Papa," she said, turning to Thomas with the letter clutched in her hands, "he's free. He's been pardoned. And he's asking—" "I read it," her father interrupted gently, "and I'm giving you my blessing." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He cupped her face in his hands. "Your mother and I married 3 weeks after we met. Everyone said we were rushing, that we didn't know each other, that it would never last. But we had 32 years together, and I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat. So yes, Lydia, if this is what you want, if he's who you want, then you have my blessing." She threw her arms around him, sobbing now, all the fear and hope and love of the past months pouring out. Her father held her tight, his own tears dampening her hair. "What will you do?" she asked when she could speak again. "The store. We'll be fine." He pulled back to look at her. "I'm not as old as I act, you know. I can manage, and Mary Beth mentioned her brother might be looking for work. We'll figure it out." "I don't know how to leave you." "Then don't think of it as leaving. Think of it as going toward love, toward life, toward everything your mother wanted for you." He smiled through his tears. "Besides, Boulder isn't that far. You can visit, and I'll expect regular letters." "Every week," she promised. The next 3 months were an agony and a blessing intertwined. Lydia threw herself into preparation, working with a dressmaker on her trousseau, ordering supplies she'd need for a new household, reading everything she could find about ranching and homesteading. She'd been a shopkeeper's daughter all her life. She had no idea how to be a rancher's wife. But she'd learn. She'd learn anything necessary to make this work. Letters from Caleb arrived weekly now, filled with details about the house he was building. It wasn't large, just 4 rooms to start, with plans to expand later. But he described it with such pride and care that Lydia could almost see it. The main room with its stone fireplace. The kitchen with windows facing east to catch the morning light. The bedroom with a view of the mountains. The porch where they could sit on summer evenings and watch the sun set. "I named the creek Emma Creek," he wrote in early April. "I hope that's all right. I wanted her to be part of this new life somehow, to know that she's not forgotten, that everything good that comes from this grew from loving her and seeking justice for her. The water runs clear and cold, and there's a bend where cottonwoods grow thick. I think you'll love it." Lydia wrote back describing her preparations, her excitement, her occasional terror at the enormity of what she was doing. "I'm leaving the only home I've ever known," she admitted. "I'm marrying a man I kissed exactly twice. By all reasonable measures, this is insane. But my heart knows something my head can't explain. It knows you. It knows us. It knows that what we have is rare and precious and worth every risk. So I'm not afraid. Or maybe I am afraid, but I'm brave anyway. You taught me that. You taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to love despite it." The weeks crawled by. Winter released its grip on Colorado, and spring came rushing in with wildflowers and warm winds. The passes cleared, the roads dried. And on May 1st, Lydia packed her trunk with everything that mattered: her mother's books, her best dresses, the letters from Caleb tied with ribbon, a photograph of her parents on their wedding day. The night before she left, her father threw her a small party. It wasn't much, just Mary Beth and her family, Sheriff Boone and his wife, Dr. Winters, a few others who'd become allies during the hard months. But it was enough, a send-off, a blessing, a recognition that she was choosing her own path, and they supported her in it. "To Lydia," Mary Beth toasted, raising her glass, "the bravest woman I know, may your love story be as epic as the risks you took to find it." "To love," Sheriff Boone added, "the kind that changes minds and redeems souls. May you and Caleb have a lifetime of it." Lydia drank and laughed and tried not to cry. These people had seen her at her worst and her best. They judged her and defended her, doubted her and believed in her. And now they were letting her go with love instead of censure. That night she couldn't sleep. She stood at her window watching the mountains, thinking about what tomorrow would bring. She was taking the stage to Boulder, where Caleb would meet her. They'd have a small wedding at the church there, nothing fancy, just vows and promises, and the beginning of forever. She was terrified. She was ready. At dawn, her father helped her load her trunk onto the stage. The driver, a grizzled man who'd been running this route for 20 years, tipped his hat. "Heard you're getting married, Miss Hartwell, to that Rourke fellow." "I am," she said, lifting her chin. "Heard he's a good man. Helped my cousin build a barn last month. Wouldn't take payment for it. Said he was just being neighborly." The driver grinned. "You picked a good one, miss. And that's coming from someone who's seen enough of humanity to know the difference." It was a small thing, that casual endorsement from a stranger, but it meant everything. Proof that Caleb was building the life he'd promised, that he was becoming the man he wanted to be. Thomas hugged her one last time, long and tight. "Your mother would be so proud," he whispered. "I am so proud. I love you, Papa. I love you too, my brave girl. Now go find your happiness." Lydia climbed into the stage, and as it pulled away, she looked back at Whispering Creek. The general store where she'd grown up, the church where her mother was buried, the streets where she'd spent 23 years preparing for a life she hadn't known she was preparing for. Then she turned forward, toward the mountains, toward Boulder, toward Caleb. The journey took 6 hours over roads still muddy from spring melt. Lydia watched the landscape change outside her window. The high valley where Whispering Creek nestled giving way to steeper terrain, then opening into the broader approaches to Boulder. She saw ranches and farms, signs of civilization growing denser as they neared the town. By the time the stage pulled into Boulder's depot, her heart was hammering so hard she thought the other passengers must hear it. She stepped down on shaking legs, and there he was. Caleb stood beside a wagon, hat in his hands, his dark hair slightly longer than she remembered, his face more relaxed. He'd gained weight, good weight, healthy weight, and the hunted look she'd seen in his eyes was gone. He wore clean clothes, simple but well made, and when he saw her, his entire face lit up with a smile that could have powered the sun. Lydia. Her name was a prayer on his lips. She wanted to run to him, to throw herself into his arms like the heroines in her novels. But there were people watching, other passengers, townspeople, the driver unloading luggage, so she walked with as much dignity as she could manage. It didn't matter. The moment she was close enough, Caleb dropped his hat and reached for her, and dignity was forgotten. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her off the ground, and she wrapped herself around him like she'd never let go. "You came," he whispered against her hair. "You really came." "Did you doubt I would?" "Every day." He set her down but kept his hands on her waist, his eyes roaming her face like he was memorizing it. "Every single day I was afraid you'd realize you could do better, that you'd come to your senses." "I did come to my senses," she said, smiling through happy tears. "That's why I'm here." He laughed and kissed her, properly this time, deeply, not caring who saw. And when they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I have so much to show you," he said. "The house, the land, the life we're going to build. But first..." He pulled back and dropped to one knee, right there in the dusty street. Lydia gasped. "Caleb, what are you—" "I know I already asked in a letter," he interrupted. "But that wasn't right. You deserve better than words on a page." He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. "Lydia Hartwell, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a former outlaw with nothing but 50 acres and a dream? Will you build a life with me, raise children with me, grow old with me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my whole world?" She was crying openly now, not caring that people had stopped to watch, that they were making a scene. "Yes. Yes, Caleb, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and stood, sweeping her into another kiss. Around them, people actually applauded, and someone yelled congratulations. "When?" Lydia asked when she could breathe again. "Tomorrow," Caleb grinned. "I've already talked to the minister. I've been ready since I sent that letter. I just needed you to arrive." "Tomorrow," she repeated, testing the word. It should have felt too fast, too rushed. Instead, it felt exactly right. They rode out to the ranch as the afternoon sun painted everything gold. Caleb drove the wagon, Lydia tucked against his side, both of them talking at once. 3 months of separation pouring out in a flood of words and laughter and plans. When the house came into view, Lydia caught her breath. It was perfect. Not grand or fancy, just a simple wooden structure with a covered porch and smoke rising from the chimney. But it sat in a valley of impossible beauty, green meadows stretching toward mountains still crowned with snow, the creek cutting silver through the landscape, cottonwoods marking its path. "Emma Creek," Caleb said softly, following her gaze. "And over there," he pointed to a small fenced area on a rise. "I'm going to plant 2 trees. One for Emma, one for my parents. So they're part of this place." Lydia squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. He showed her everything. The barn he'd built with help from neighbors, the corral for the horses he planned to raise, the garden plot already turned and ready for planting, and finally, the house itself. It smelled of fresh wood and soap and the stew simmering over the fire. The furniture was simple. A table he'd built himself, chairs purchased in town, a bed frame waiting for the mattress that would arrive tomorrow. But the care was evident in every detail, the way the windows were positioned to capture light. The shelves he'd put up in what would be their bedroom, ready for books. The rocking chair on the porch, already worn smooth from his evenings spent there. "It's not much yet," Caleb said, nervous suddenly, "but I'll build it up. I'll add rooms as we need them, make it comfortable, make it—" "It's perfect," Lydia interrupted. "It's absolutely perfect." That night, they sat on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains, talking until the stars came out. They talked about the wedding tomorrow, about who would stand up with them, about where they'd go on a brief honeymoon. They talked about the ranch, about Lydia's plans for a garden, about maybe getting chickens and eventually a milk cow. They talked about Whispering Creek and Denver, about her father and Emma, about the past that had brought them here, and the future stretching out before them. And as the darkness deepened and the temperature dropped, Caleb pulled a blanket around them both and said, "I need to tell you something." Lydia looked up at him, seeing the seriousness in his face. What is it? This life. It's not going to be easy. Ranching is hard work. The winters are brutal. We'll face setbacks and failures and days when nothing goes right. And I'm not perfect. I have nightmares sometimes about Emma, about the men I killed. I wake up in cold sweats thinking I'm back on the run, and some days I still can't quite believe this is real, that I'm allowed to have this. He took her hands, looking directly into her eyes. But I promise you this. I will work every day to be worthy of you. I will build us a life of integrity and purpose. I will love you fiercely and faithfully until my last breath. I will be honest with you even when it's hard. I will protect you, provide for you, cherish you. And I will never, ever take for granted the gift you're giving me by choosing this life, by choosing me. Lydia felt tears slip down her cheeks. I have promises too. You don't have to. Yes, I do. She squeezed his hands. I promise to be your partner in all things, equal in this life we're building. I promise to be strong when you're weak and to let you be strong when I'm weak. I promise to challenge you, support you, stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to honor Emma's memory by living fully, by loving bravely, by being the kind of woman who makes your sacrifice mean something. And I promise to remind you every single day that you're not defined by your worst moments. You're defined by what you chose to do after them. They held each other in the darkness, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd chosen love when the world said they were foolish, who'd built hope out of ashes and grief. They called you foolish for loving me, Caleb said quietly. I know. What do you call it? Lydia smiled, thinking of her answer, knowing it was true, but she'd save it for later, for tomorrow, when they stood before God and witnesses and promised forever. For all the tomorrows after that, when they'd prove that the greatest wisdom was found in the heart the world called foolish. I call it the best decision I ever made, she said simply. Now let's go inside. We have a wedding to prepare for, and I want to sleep in my new home for the first time. They rose and walked into the house together, and behind them the mountains stood eternal, the stars wheeled overhead, and Emma Creek sang its endless song of water over stone. The past was finally past. The future was finally here, and neither of them was afraid anymore. Morning arrived with birdsong and golden light streaming through the windows Caleb had positioned to catch the dawn. Lydia woke in the small bedroom, still fully dressed from the night before. The blanket Caleb had draped over her tucked carefully around her shoulders. He'd slept in the main room, she realized. Propriety maintained even here, even when they were alone. It made her love him more. She rose and found him already outside, splitting wood in the cool morning air. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his movements efficient and practiced, and she stood in the doorway watching him work. This was the man she was marrying today. Not the desperate outlaw who'd walked into her father's store 6 months ago, but this version, steady, purposeful, building something with his hands instead of destroying. He must have sensed her watching because he looked up, and that smile broke across his face again, the one that still made her heart stutter. Morning, he called. There's coffee on the stove, fresh made. You're full of surprises, Caleb Rourke. I didn't know outlaws could cook. Former outlaw, he corrected, setting down the axe and wiping his hands on his trousers as he walked toward her. And I learned survival skills on the trail. Coffee was the first and most important. He stopped on the bottom porch step, bringing them nearly eye to eye. The morning light caught in his pale blue eyes, and Lydia saw nothing but openness there now. No shadows or secrets, just a man looking at his future with wonder. Did you sleep well? He asked. Better than I have in months. Knowing you were close, knowing this was real. She reached out to touch his face, tracing the scar that ran from temple to jaw. Are you nervous? About today? Terrified, he admitted. Not about marrying you. That's the only thing I'm certain about. But about whether I can be the husband you deserve. Whether I can build a life good enough for what you're giving up. I'm not giving up anything, Lydia said firmly. I'm trading one life for a better one. A fuller one. With you. He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. We should eat something, then head into town. The ceremony's at 11, and I want to stop by the general store first. I need to pick up your wedding gift. You got me a gift? Of course I did. What kind of husband would I be if I didn't? He grinned. Though fair warning, it's practical more than romantic. They ate a simple breakfast of bread and jam that Caleb had purchased from a neighbor, then loaded into the wagon for the ride into Boulder. The town was larger than Whispering Creek, with 3 times the population and real shops lining actual streets. Lydia had only seen it in passing yesterday, but now she noticed the details. The hotel where they'd spend tonight, the church with its white steeple, the people going about their Saturday morning business. Caleb stopped at a general store much like her father's and disappeared inside while Lydia waited. He emerged carrying a large wrapped package, his expression pleased and slightly mysterious. "What is it?" she asked. "You'll see tonight. It's practical," he repeated. "But I think you'll like it." They continued to the church where Reverend Matthews was waiting, a kind-faced man in his 50s who greeted them warmly. "Mr. Rourke, Miss Hartwell, everything's ready. Your witnesses arrived a few minutes ago." Lydia's heart jumped. "Witnesses? I thought we were doing this alone." "I took the liberty of sending some invitations," Caleb said, looking slightly sheepish. "I hope you don't mind." He led her around to the side entrance, and when they walked in, Lydia gasped. Her father stood near the front pew, his face lighting up when he saw her. Beside him was Mary Beth, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Sheriff Boone and his wife sat in the second row, and next to them, impossible but real, was Mrs. Patterson from the Whispering Creek boarding house, and Timothy Marsh, and even Dr. Winters. "Papa!" Lydia rushed to her father, throwing her arms around him. When did you? "Caleb sent word 3 weeks ago," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "Arranged transportation for anyone who wanted to come. Said he wouldn't marry my daughter without her family present." He pulled back to look at her. "You look so much like your mother right now. So happy. So alive." "I am alive," she whispered. "For the first time in so long, I'm really alive." Mary Beth hugged her next, then Sheriff Boone, each person offering congratulations and blessings. Even Mrs. Patterson, who'd been so disapproving back in Whispering Creek, squeezed her hand and said, "I was wrong about him, about both of you. I see that now." Reverend Matthews cleared his throat gently. "Shall we begin?" Lydia turned to find Caleb standing at the front of the church, and her breath caught. He'd changed into a new suit, black with a crisp white shirt, and someone had trimmed his hair. But it was the expression on his face that made her knees weak. He looked at her like she was sunrise and salvation, like she was every good thing he'd stopped believing in and found again. She walked down the short aisle with her father on one arm, no music except the sound of her own heartbeat. When Thomas placed her hand in Caleb's, he whispered, "Take care of her." "With my life," Caleb promised. The ceremony was simple and profound. Reverend Matthews spoke about love as an act of courage, about 2 people choosing to build something together in a world that tried to tear things apart. He read from Corinthians about love being patient and kind, and Lydia felt the words sink into her bones. Then it was time for vows. Caleb went first, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Lydia, 6 months ago I walked into a store in a town I'd never heard of, and you looked at me like I was human. Not a monster, not a legend, just a man. You saw past the stories to the truth underneath, and you weren't afraid. You gave me books and hope and a reason to believe I could be more than my worst mistakes." He took a shaky breath. "I promise to honor that gift every day of my life, to be worthy of your faith in me, to build us a home filled with love and laughter, to be your partner in all things, your protector when you need it, and your supporter in all your dreams. I promise to love you with everything I am and everything I'll become. From this day until my last day." Lydia was crying openly now, not bothering to hide it. When it was her turn, she had to pause to steady her voice. "Caleb, my mother taught me that real wisdom often looks like foolishness to people who've never been brave enough to risk their hearts. She taught me that love isn't safe. It's the most dangerous thing we do, but it's also the most important. When I met you, everyone told me to stay away. They said you were dangerous, damaged, beyond redemption. But I saw something different. I saw a man who'd loved his sister so much, he sought justice when the world wouldn't give it. I saw someone who carried Shakespeare across hundreds of miles because words still mattered to him. I saw a soul that was wounded but not broken." She squeezed his hands. "I promise to walk beside you through whatever comes, To be strong when you need strength and gentle when you need grace. To build this life with you, day by day, choice by choice. To love you not despite your past, but because of how you've transformed it into something beautiful. From this moment forward, you're not alone anymore. You're mine, and I'm yours, and that's all that matters. Reverend Matthews smiled through his own tears. By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride. And he did, deeply, thoroughly, like he was sealing a promise that went beyond words. When they finally broke apart, their small gathering erupted in applause, and Lydia laughed through her tears as Caleb swept her into his arms and spun her around. Mrs. Rourke, he said, testing the name. Mrs. Rourke, she repeated, loving how it sounded. They signed the papers in Reverend Matthews's office, making it official in the eyes of the law and God. Then Thomas insisted on treating everyone to lunch at the hotel restaurant, and they spent 2 hours eating and talking and celebrating. The meal was loud and joyful, full of toasts and stories and laughter that echoed off the walls. Sheriff Boone stood and raised his glass. To Caleb and Lydia, two people who proved that redemption is real, that love can transform us, and that sometimes the wisest thing we can do is trust our hearts over our fears. May your life together be long and full and blessed with the kind of happiness you both fought so hard to find. To Caleb and Lydia, everyone chorused. As the afternoon wore on, people began preparing for the journey back to Whispering Creek. The stage would leave at 3, giving them just enough time. Lydia hugged each person goodbye, promising to write, promising to visit, promising to stay in touch. Her father was the last. He held her for a long time, neither of them speaking, both understanding that this was goodbye to one chapter and hello to another. Your mother would be dancing right now, Thomas finally said. She always knew you had an adventurer's heart. I tried to protect it, tried to keep it safe, but she was right. You were meant for this, meant for him. Thank you for letting me go, Papa, and for coming today. It meant everything. Come visit soon, he said, pulling back to look at her. I want to see this ranch you'll be building. Want to watch you make a life. Soon, she promised. I love you. I love you too, my brave girl. Then he was gone, climbing onto the stage with the others, and Lydia stood beside Caleb waving until they disappeared around a bend in the road. Alone at last, Caleb said softly, pulling her close. Not quite. We still have to get through dinner and... She paused, suddenly shy. And tonight... He tilted her chin up, his eyes warm. We have the rest of our lives, Lydia. There's no rush for anything. We'll figure it all out together, at our own pace. They collected the gift from the general store, along with supplies Caleb had ordered for a special dinner, then drove back to the ranch as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. The valley was bathed in golden light, and everything looked softer somehow, more magical. Inside, Caleb handed her the wrapped package. For you, for us really, but mostly for you. Lydia tore the paper carefully and gasped. Inside was a complete set of writing supplies, journals, ink, steel nib pens, a portable writing desk made of polished wood. But more than that, there were books. New books she'd never read, including several volumes by female authors. You said you wanted to write, Caleb explained, watching her face. About your mother, about your life, maybe about us someday. I thought you should have the tools to do it, and the books. I figured you'd want something new to read now that you've left your father's store behind. Lydia set the gifts down carefully and kissed him with all the love and gratitude and joy she couldn't put into words. Thank you. It's perfect. You're perfect. I'm not, he said, but he was smiling. But I'm trying to be good enough for you. They prepared dinner together in the small kitchen, moving around each other with surprising ease. Caleb had purchased a chicken from a neighbor, and Lydia made it with potatoes and early carrots from someone's greenhouse. It was simple food, but they ate like kings, sitting at the table Caleb had built, talking about their plans for the ranch. I want to breed horses, Caleb said, refilling her water glass. Good working horses, the kind ranchers and farmers need. There's a market for it, and I've always had a way with them. And I want to plant a garden, Lydia added. Not just vegetables for us, but flowers too. I want this place to be beautiful as well as functional. I want Emma Creek to be somewhere people see and think love lives there. It will be, Caleb promised. We'll make it that together. After dinner, they washed dishes side by side, then stepped out onto the porch to watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold and purple. Caleb pulled the rocking chair close to his own chair, and they sat holding hands as darkness crept across the valley. "Tell me something about Emma," Lydia said softly. "Something happy. Something that makes you smile." Caleb was quiet for a moment, then he laughed softly. She couldn't sing, couldn't carry a tune to save her life. But she loved music, so she'd sing anyway, loud and off-key, and dare me to complain about it. She'd say, "God doesn't care if I'm on pitch, Caleb. He cares that I'm joyful." And she was right. She was so joyful, even when things were hard. "She sounds wonderful." She was. She would have loved you. He squeezed Lydia's hand. She would have said you were too good for me, but she would have been grateful that you didn't care. "I'm not too good for you. We're good for each other. There's a difference." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged one by one. Lydia thought about the past 6 months, the fear and hope, the waiting and wondering, the way her life had transformed from small and safe to expansive and unknown. She thought about her mother reading Shakespeare by candlelight, about the passages she'd underlined, about the wisdom she'd tried to pass on. "Caleb?" she said quietly. "Yes?" "Do you remember asking me what I'd call our story? What I'd call choosing to love you?" "I remember." "I'm ready to answer now." She turned to face him in the darkness. "I call it wisdom. The kind that only comes from listening to your heart when the whole world tells you you're wrong. The kind that knows some risks are worth taking, some people are worth fighting for, some loves are worth everything you have to give up to protect them." Caleb stood and pulled her to her feet, drawing her into his arms. "You've given me more than I ever thought I'd have again. More than I deserve." "Stop saying that," she chided gently. "You deserve happiness. You deserve love. You deserve a life that's more than just surviving, and I'm going to spend every day proving that to you until you believe it. That might take a while." "Good thing we have forever, then." He kissed her slowly, tenderly, like they had all the time in the world. And they did. No bounty hunters chasing them, no town gossiping about them, no past hunting them. Just this moment, this love, this life they were beginning together. When they finally went inside, Caleb lit the lamps and showed Lydia the bedroom properly. He'd made up the bed with new linens, had placed wildflowers in a jar on the windowsill, had hung curtains she could draw for privacy. "I'll sleep in the main room tonight," he said, reading her nervousness. "I meant what I said earlier. We have time. There's no rush." "Stay," Lydia said, surprising herself with the word. "I don't want to spend my wedding night alone, even if we're just sleeping. Even if—" She took a breath. "I want to wake up next to my husband." Something shifted in Caleb's expression, a deepening of the love already there. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." They prepared for bed with nervous laughter and averted eyes, both of them suddenly shy despite all they'd been through. But once they were under the blankets, the awkwardness faded. Caleb gathered her close, her head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders, and Lydia felt something settle deep in her soul. This was home. Not the house, not the land, but this. Being held by someone who knew her fully and loved her anyway. "Lydia?" Caleb's voice rumbled in his chest. "Hmm?" "Thank you for seeing me, for looking twice when everyone else looked away, for being brave enough to love me when I'd forgotten how to love myself." She tilted her head to kiss his jaw. "Thank you for coming into my father's store that day. Thank you for returning books you didn't have to return. Thank you for staying in Whispering Creek long enough for me to know you. Thank you for leaving so you could come back whole. Thank you for building this life and inviting me into it." "We built it together," he corrected, "even when we were apart. Every letter, every hope, every promise. We were building this together." She settled back against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, strong and steady and sure. Outside, the wind whispered through the cottonwoods along Emma Creek. Inside, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds held each other through their first night as husband and wife. And somewhere, Lydia thought, her mother and Emma were watching and smiling, two women who'd known about love and sacrifice and the wisdom that looked like foolishness to everyone who'd never been brave enough to risk their hearts. The next weeks passed in a blur of hard work and happy discovery. They rose with the sun and worked until dusk, building their life one task at a time. Caleb taught Lydia to ride properly, to read weather in the clouds, to understand the rhythms of ranch life. She taught him to cook more than just trail food, to appreciate poetry read aloud, to find joy in small domestic rituals. They had their first fight 3 weeks in, over something trivial, whether to plant the garden east or south of the house. Lydia wanted east for morning sun. Caleb argued south for protection from wind. It escalated faster than either expected, both of them frustrated and tired from constant physical labor. And they ended up yelling at each other across the kitchen table. Then Caleb laughed. "What's so funny?" Lydia demanded. "We're fighting about a garden," he said, shaking his head. 6 months ago, I was running for my life, and now I'm arguing with my wife about vegetables. It's the most normal thing I've done in years, and it's wonderful." Lydia felt her anger deflate. "You're impossible." "So are you. That's why we work." He came around the table and pulled her into his arms. "East for the garden. You're right. You're always right about growing things." "I'm not always right." "You're right about the things that matter." He kissed her forehead. "And I promise to remember that even when we're fighting." They made up properly, and Lydia learned something important. Love wasn't just the easy moments. It was also the fights you worked through, the compromises you made, the grace you extended when you were both tired and frustrated and trying your best. The garden went in on the east side. Within weeks, green shoots emerged, and Lydia felt absurdly proud of each tomato plant, each row of beans, each patch of herbs. This was hers, theirs, evidence that they could nurture something and watch it grow. Neighbors began stopping by, curious about the pardoned outlaw and his new wife. Some came with suspicion, but Caleb's easy manner and Lydia's genuine warmth won most of them over. Within a month, they'd been invited to 2 barn raisings and a church social. The community was slowly accepting them, slowly letting them belong. Thomas visited in late June, staying for a week. He brought gifts from Whispering Creek, quilts made by the church ladies, preserves from Mary Beth's mother, a carved wooden sign for their ranch that said Emma Creek in elegant letters. He worked alongside Caleb building a new corral, and Lydia watched the 2 men slowly develop mutual respect and affection. "You've done well," Thomas told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "This life you're building, it's good, it's real. Your mother would be so proud." "I miss her," Lydia admitted. "I wish she could see this. Meet Caleb. Know that I found what she told me to look for." "She knows," Thomas said firmly. "I believe that with everything in me. She knows, and she's happy for you." July brought heat and the first real test of their marriage. A neighboring rancher's cattle broke through fences and trampled half of Lydia's garden. She was devastated, standing in the ruins of weeks of work, trying not to cry. Caleb found her there and didn't offer empty comfort or try to minimize her loss. Instead, he said, "We'll replant. We'll build better fences, and I'll talk to Henderson about compensation for the damage." "It's not his fault his fences broke. It's his responsibility, though. And you worked hard on this garden. That matters." He took her hands. "Your work matters, Lydia. Your dreams matter, and I'll defend both with everything I have." He did talk to Henderson, who apologized profusely and insisted on helping repair the damage. Within a week, they had new fences and fresh seeds planted. The garden wouldn't produce much this year, but there was always next year, always another chance to try. By August, the ranch was starting to take real shape. They had 3 horses now, Caleb's black gelding and 2 mares he'd purchased for breeding. The house had a new room added, giving them more space. Lydia's writing desk sat in a corner of the bedroom, her journals filled with observations about ranch life, letters she'd send to her father, the beginnings of a story about her mother. One evening, Caleb came home from Boulder with a letter. "It's from the prosecutor," he said, his face carefully neutral. "The one who handled Benton's trial." Lydia's heart jumped. "What does it say?" Caleb opened it slowly, reading aloud. "Dear Mr. Rourke, I'm writing to inform you that Silas Benton died in prison last month. Heart failure, the doctors said, though I suspect it was also a failure of conscience. With his death, the last connection to your past is severed. You're truly free now, in every sense of the word. I hope you're building the life you deserve. You earned it. With respect and admiration, James Whitmore. The letter fluttered from Caleb's hands. He sat down heavily, and Lydia saw tears streaming down his face, the first time she'd ever seen him cry. "He's gone," Caleb whispered. "It's over. It's really over." She knelt in front of him, taking his face in her hands. "Emma can rest now. You can rest now. I thought I'd feel satisfaction or vindication, but I just feel tired and grateful." He pulled her close, burying his face in her shoulder. "Grateful that I survived long enough to find you. Grateful that I didn't let bitterness destroy me. Grateful that Emma's death led to this instead of just more death." They held each other as the sun set. Two people who'd walked through fire and come out the other side, scarred but whole, broken but healing, ready finally to be fully present in the life they were building. That night, Lydia wrote in her journal, "Today we learned that the past is truly past. Tomorrow we begin again. Not as survivors, but as people choosing joy. Not as damaged souls, but as whole ones. The garden is growing. The horses are thriving, our love is deepening, and I am happier than I ever imagined possible. They called me foolish for loving this man. I call it the wisest thing I ever did." September brought their first real test as ranchers, a buyer from Denver interested in purchasing the two mares for breeding stock. It was their first significant business transaction, and Caleb was nervous. "What if I price them too high or too low? I've never been a businessman, Lydia. I've been a farmer, a soldier, an outlaw, but never this." "Then we'll figure it out together," she said calmly. "I grew up in a store, remember? I know how to negotiate. We'll do this as partners." The buyer came, and they did negotiate as partners. Lydia reading the man's tells, Caleb demonstrating the horse's quality, both of them presenting a united front. They got a fair price, enough to buy 2 more horses and have money left over for winter supplies. "We did it," Caleb said after the buyer left, picking Lydia up and spinning her around. "We're real ranchers now. We sold horses." She laughed at his enthusiasm, his joy, the way he'd transformed from the careful, guarded man she'd met into someone who could celebrate small victories without fear of losing them. By October, the mountains were crowned with snow again, and Emma Creek ran cold and fast with mountain runoff. They prepared for winter, stocking supplies, insulating the barn, making sure they had enough feed for the horses. Lydia canned the vegetables that had survived the cattle incident, and their small cellar filled with jars of tomatoes, beans, and the wild berries she'd gathered from along the creek. One evening in late October, as they sat by the fire, Caleb asked, "Are you happy?" "Really happy?" Lydia looked up from the shirt she was mending. "What brought this on?" "I just need to know. Need to hear you say it. Because sometimes I wake up and can't believe this is real. Can't believe I get to have you, this life, this peace." She set down her sewing and moved to sit beside him on the floor, her back against his chest, his arms around her waist. "I'm happier than I knew was possible. Every single day with you is a gift, even the hard days, even when we're fighting about gardens or worried about money or struggling with something we don't know how to do, because we're doing it together. No regrets?" "Not a single one." She tilted her head back to look at him. "Do you have regrets?" "Only that I didn't meet you sooner, that we lost years we could have spent together." He kissed her temple. "But maybe we needed those years apart. Maybe I needed to be broken down completely before I could be built back into someone worthy of you." "You were always worthy, Caleb. You just couldn't see it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire, listening to the wind whistle around the house. Outside, winter was coming, but inside they were warm and safe and together. They'd survived everything the world had thrown at them: judgment, violence, separation, doubt, and they'd come through stronger than either had been alone. Winter came down hard that year, blanketing Emma Creek Ranch in 3 feet of snow by mid-November. The world contracted to the space between the house and the barn, to the daily rhythm of feeding horses and keeping fires burning and staying warm. Lydia had never experienced a Colorado winter this far into the mountains, and some mornings she woke to frost patterns on the inside of the windows despite the fire burning all night. But she wasn't afraid. Caleb had prepared well, and they had everything they needed: food, fuel, each other. In fact, Lydia discovered that she loved the enforced intimacy of winter. No visitors dropping by, no work that couldn't wait until spring, just the two of them, learning each other in the quiet hours, building a marriage that went deeper than passion or romance into something more fundamental. "Tell me about when you were a girl," Caleb said one evening as they sat by the fire, his head in her lap while she read aloud from Whitman. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. What you dreamed about, what scared you, what made you laugh." He reached up to touch her face. "I want to know all the versions of you that existed before I met you." So she told him. About her mother teaching her to read before she was 4, about climbing trees her father said were too dangerous, about the time she'd tried to run away to Denver and made it 3 miles before getting lost and having to be rescued by a neighbor. She told him about her first crush at 14, about the traveling theater troupe that had sparked her love of Shakespeare, about the way her mother's illness had changed everything, made the world feel fragile and uncertain. "I spent 5 years after she died being small," Lydia admitted, "being careful, trying not to feel too much or want too much or risk too much, because if I never reached for anything, I couldn't lose it." "What changed?" "You." She smiled down at him. "You walked into the store, and something in me recognized something in you, like we were both holding our breath, waiting for permission to live again. And somehow seeing you struggle with it made me brave enough to stop struggling with it myself." Caleb pulled her down for a kiss. "You saved me, Lydia. In every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," she corrected. "That's how this works." December brought a visitor they hadn't expected, a young man on a struggling horse, half frozen and desperate. Caleb spotted him from the barn and brought him in immediately. Lydia warmed blankets and made hot coffee while Caleb helped the stranger out of his frozen clothes and into dry ones. "Thank you," the man said through chattering teeth. His name was Daniel Pritchard, and he was barely 20, with soft hands that said he'd never done manual labor. "I was trying to reach Boulder. Got caught in the storm yesterday. Thought I was going to die out there." "You nearly did," Caleb said, checking the young man's fingers and toes for frostbite. "What's in Boulder that's worth risking your life in a blizzard?" Daniel's face crumpled. "My sister. She ran off with a man our father didn't approve of. Got married in secret. Father disowned her, said she was dead to him. But she's my sister, and I love her, and—" He broke down completely. "I just want her to know she's not alone. That I still care. That family is supposed to mean more than pride." Lydia and Caleb exchanged a look. The story was too familiar, too close to their own experiences with judgment and family and choosing love over approval. "The storm's not letting up," Caleb said gently. "You'll stay here until it passes. Then I'll take you to Boulder myself. Make sure you get there safely." Daniel looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "Because someone did the same for me once," Caleb said, though it wasn't quite true. No one had helped him when he'd needed it most. But he could help this young man now, could be for Daniel what he wished someone had been for him. "And because your sister deserves to know she's loved, that's always worth the risk." Daniel stayed for 3 days while the storm raged. In that time, they learned his story, how his sister Sarah had fallen in love with a ranch hand, how their wealthy father had forbidden the match, how Sarah had chosen love anyway and paid the price. Daniel had been caught between loyalty to family and loyalty to his sister, but in the end, his heart had won. "Father said I was a fool," Daniel told them on the second night. "Said I was throwing away my inheritance, my place in society, all for what? A girl who made her choice?" "She's not just a girl," Lydia said firmly. "She's your sister. And love isn't foolish, Daniel. Fear is foolish. Pride is foolish. But love is the bravest thing we do." When the storm broke, Caleb saddled 2 horses and rode out with Daniel, leaving Lydia alone at the ranch. She spent the day baking bread and writing letters and trying not to worry. Caleb knew these mountains, knew how to navigate winter conditions, but still, the world was dangerous, and she'd learned too well how quickly everything could change. He returned at dusk, his face red from wind and cold, but smiling. "She cried," he reported as Lydia helped him out of his frozen coat. Sarah, I mean. When Daniel showed up at her door, she just fell apart. Her husband seemed like a good man, protective of her, grateful to Daniel for coming. They're living in a small cabin outside Boulder, struggling but happy. Did Daniel stay with them? He did. He's going to work with the husband, learn ranching, build something of his own. Caleb pulled Lydia close. Watching them, it reminded me of us. How people said we were foolish, but we knew better. Sometimes the foolish choice is the only wise one there is. Winter deepened, and with it came a quiet revelation for Lydia. Her monthly courses, usually reliable as clockwork, didn't come in December or January. By early February, she was certain, though she waited another week before telling Caleb. She chose a Sunday morning after they'd returned from church in Boulder. The roads had finally cleared enough for travel, and they'd started attending services regularly, slowly becoming part of the community. On this particular Sunday, Reverend Matthews had preached about new life, about spring coming even when winter felt endless. Back at the ranch, Lydia was preparing lunch when Caleb came in from checking the horses. He hung up his coat and came to kiss her cheek, and she caught his hand before he could move away. I need to tell you something, she said, her heart racing. He went still, reading her tone. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. At least I don't think so. I hope not. She took a breath. Caleb, I'm pregnant. For a moment he just stared at her, not moving, barely breathing. Then his face transformed, shock giving way to wonder, wonder giving way to pure incandescent joy. You're sure? His voice was barely a whisper. As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there. I'm about 2 months along, I think. Caleb sat down heavily, pulling her into his lap, his hand spanning her waist. We're having a baby. We're having a baby, she confirmed, laughing at his dazed expression. I'm going to be a father. He said it like he was testing the words, trying them on for size. Me, a father. Are you happy about it? Lydia asked, suddenly uncertain. They'd never discussed children, had never planned for this. Maybe he wasn't ready. Maybe... Happy? He cut off her spiraling thoughts with a kiss that made her forget her own name. Lydia, I'm terrified and amazed and grateful beyond words. I never thought, after everything I've done, everything I've been, I never thought I'd get to have this. A wife who loves me. A home I built with my own hands. And now a child. His voice broke. It's more grace than I ever imagined possible. They held each other for a long time, and Lydia felt tears on her cheeks, though she couldn't say whose they were, his or hers or both. A baby. Their baby. A new life built from their love, proof that good things could grow from ashes and grief. Emma would have been an aunt, Caleb said softly. She would have spoiled this child rotten. Then we'll tell them about her. Every story you remember, every way she was wonderful. She'll live on in our family, in the way we love this baby. What if I'm a terrible father? Caleb's voice was small, vulnerable. What if I don't know how? What if... You'll figure it out, Lydia interrupted. Just like we figured out ranching and marriage and everything else. Together. And Caleb, you have the most important qualification already. What's that? You know how to love, how to protect what matters, how to be brave enough to try even when you're scared. She kissed him softly. That's all any parent can do. Love their child and try their best. The news transformed something in Caleb. He became even more focused, more determined to make the ranch succeed. He worked from dawn until dusk, building a larger barn, improving fences, preparing for the foals that would come in spring. At night, he read books about animal husbandry and land management, teaching himself everything he needed to know. But he also became tender in new ways. He wouldn't let Lydia lift anything heavy. He brought her tea in bed every morning. He talked to her belly even though there was nothing to see yet, telling the baby stories about the ranch, about Emma, about how loved they already were. You're going to be an incredible father, Lydia told him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the first hints of spring color the mountains. This baby is so lucky. I'm the lucky one, Caleb said, his hand on her still flat stomach. I get to have everything I thought I'd lost. Family, purpose, a future worth living for. March brought Thomas to visit, and Lydia told him the news immediately. Her father's face lit up with a joy she hadn't seen since before her mother died. "A grandchild," he said, wonder in his voice. Catherine always wanted grandchildren. She'd be over the moon. "I wish she could be here," Lydia admitted, "to tell me what to expect, to help me through it." "She left you something," Thomas said, pulling a small package from his bag. "I was supposed to give it to you when you had your first child. She wrote instructions before she died." Inside was a journal in her mother's handwriting, filled with advice and observations about pregnancy and childbirth and motherhood. The last entry made Lydia cry. "My darling girl, if you're reading this, you're about to become a mother yourself. And I want you to know you were the greatest joy of my life. Every moment of pain was worth it to have you. Be brave, my love. Your body knows what to do. Your heart knows what to do. Trust yourself. Trust your child. And know that I'm with you always in every choice you make. Love them loudly, Lydia. Love them the way I loved you, fiercely, completely, without reservation. That's the greatest wisdom I can offer. Love is never foolish, even when the world says it is. Especially then. All my love forever and always, Mama." Lydia clutched the journal to her chest, and Caleb held her while she cried for the mother who wouldn't meet her grandchild, for the grandmother their baby would only know through stories and this precious journal. "She's here," Thomas said quietly. "In the way you love Caleb, in the way you chose this life, in the way you'll love your child. Catherine lives on in you, Lydia, and that's a beautiful thing." Spring arrived with force, melting snow flooding Emma Creek, turning the valley bright green almost overnight. The horses had their foals, 2 healthy colts that Caleb could sell for good money in a few years. The garden, replanted with twice as much ambition as last year, began to flourish. And Lydia's belly finally began to show, a small swell that made the pregnancy real in a way it hadn't been before. They had visitors throughout the spring and summer, neighbors checking on them, friends from Boulder dropping by. Even Mary Beth making the journey with her new beau. Each visit reinforced that they weren't alone anymore. They'd built a community, a network of people who cared about them and wanted to see them succeed. In June, Daniel Pritchard came by with his sister Sarah and her husband Tom. Sarah was pregnant too, due just a month after Lydia, and the 2 women bonded immediately over shared experiences and fears. "Everyone told me I was a fool for marrying Tom," Sarah confided one afternoon while their husbands worked in the barn. "They said I was throwing away everything for a man with nothing. But look at what I would have missed." She gestured around the ranch at the life they'd built. "This is real. This is mine. No one gave it to me. I chose it, and Tom and I are building it together. That's worth more than any inheritance." "People called me foolish too," Lydia said, "for loving an outlaw, for defying my father, for leaving everything I knew." "And do you regret it?" Lydia thought about everything that had brought her to this moment, the fear and courage, the judgment and support, the struggle and triumph. She thought about Caleb, who'd transformed from a hunted man into a devoted husband and soon-to-be father. She thought about the baby moving inside her, proof that love could create new life even from the ashes of old pain. "Not for 1 second," she said firmly. "Not ever." By August, Lydia was enormously pregnant, waddling more than walking, constantly uncomfortable, but radiantly happy. Dr. Winters came from Whispering Creek to check on her, pronouncing both mother and baby healthy. He'd stay through the birth, he said. Thomas had arranged it and was paying his fee. "Your father loves you very much," Dr. Winters told Lydia as he packed his medical bag. "He talks about you constantly, about how proud he is, about how brave you've been." "I learned it from him," Lydia said, "and from my mother. They taught me that love requires courage, and courage requires love. Everything else is just details." Labor started on a Tuesday evening in early September, just as the sun was setting behind the mountains. Lydia was hanging laundry when the first contraction hit, and she stood very still, hand on her belly, recognizing it for what it was. "Caleb," she called, her voice surprisingly calm. "It's time." He dropped the wood he'd been stacking and ran to her, his face pale with sudden fear. "Now? Are you sure?" "Very sure." Another contraction made her gasp. "Get Dr. Winters and my father." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and effort, and Caleb's steady presence beside her. Dr. Winters was clinical and reassuring. Her father held her hand and told her stories about when she was born, about how Catherine had been just as brave, just as strong. And Caleb never left her side, wiping her forehead, telling her she could do this, that he loved her, that their baby was almost here. "I can't," she sobbed at one point, exhausted beyond measure. "I can't do this anymore." "Yes, you can," Caleb said firmly, his face close to hers. "You're the bravest person I know, Lydia. You faced down bounty hunters. You defied an entire town. You chose to love me when every reasonable person said you shouldn't. You can do this." "One more push," Dr. Winters encouraged. "Come on, Lydia. Meet your baby." She gathered every ounce of strength she had left and pushed, and suddenly the room was filled with the piercing cry of new life. Dr. Winters worked quickly, and then he was placing a tiny, perfect, impossibly beautiful baby in her arms. "A girl," he announced, smiling. "A healthy baby girl." Lydia looked down at her daughter, at the dark hair already thick on her head, at the blue eyes blinking up at her, at the tiny fists waving in the air, and fell completely, irrevocably in love. "Hello, sweet girl," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Caleb was crying openly, reaching out with a trembling hand to touch his daughter's cheek. "She's perfect. Lydia, she's absolutely perfect." "What will you name her?" Thomas asked, his own eyes wet with tears. Lydia looked at Caleb, and they spoke at the same time. "Emma Catherine." "Emma for my sister," Caleb said. "Catherine for your mother, two women who taught us about love and courage and wisdom." "Two women who would have loved her so much," Lydia added, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Hello, Emma Catherine Rourke. You're so loved, so very, very loved." The weeks after Emma's birth were exhausting and magical in equal measure. Lydia learned to feed her daughter, to soothe her cries, to function on almost no sleep. Caleb was a natural with the baby, holding her for hours while Lydia rested, talking to her constantly, showing her the ranch that would be her home. "She's going to ride before she can walk," he predicted, walking the porch with Emma against his shoulder. "She's going to know every inch of this land. And she's going to grow up knowing she's loved, that she's safe, that she can be anything she wants to be." "She's going to know about her namesakes too," Lydia said, watching them from the rocking chair. "About Emma, who loved Shakespeare and laughed even when things were hard. About Catherine, who chose adventure over safety and never regretted it. She's going to know about her mother," Caleb said softly. "About how you were called foolish for loving me, but you did it anyway. About how you saved my life in every way that matters. About how the bravest thing you ever did was trust your heart over everyone else's fear." Emma gurgled, waving a tiny fist, and Caleb laughed. "She agrees with me. She's 2 weeks old. She has no opinions yet. She has excellent taste in parents, though." Lydia threw a pillow at him, and he dodged it easily, grinning. This was their life now, exhaustion and joy, sleepless nights and perfect moments, the beautiful chaos of raising a child while building a ranch, while deepening a marriage. October brought the first anniversary of their wedding, and Caleb surprised Lydia with a gift he'd been working on for months. He led her outside after dinner, Emma bundled in her arms, and showed her what he'd built on the rise overlooking Emma Creek. 2 trees, already planted and thriving, an aspen for Emma, an oak for Catherine. Between them, a simple bench with a brass plaque that read, "In memory of those we love, in celebration of the life they made possible." "It's perfect," Lydia whispered, tears streaming down her face. They would have loved it, loved this, loved her. They sat on the bench together as the sun set, Emma sleeping peacefully between them, and looked out over the life they'd built. The house that had grown from 4 rooms to 6, the barn full of horses, the garden flourishing in its 2nd year, the land that stretched away toward mountains painted gold and purple by the dying light. "Do you remember what you asked me that first night?" Lydia said softly. "What I'd call our story?" "I remember. I told you wisdom, the kind that looks like foolishness to everyone watching." She turned to face him. "But I want to add something to that answer now." "What's that?" "I'd call it grace, the unearned, undeserved, absolutely miraculous kind. Grace that took a broken man and a careful woman and brought them together. Grace that transformed pain into purpose, grief into growth, shame into redemption. She gestured to everything around them. This is what grace looks like, Caleb. This life, this love, this beautiful daughter. None of us earned it. We just chose to believe it was possible, and grace did the rest. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. 3 years ago, I was running for my life, convinced I'd never have anything worth living for again. I thought the best I could hope for was survival, maybe vengeance, but definitely not this. Never this. And now? Now I have everything. He put his arm around her, his other hand on Emma's tiny back. I have a wife who sees the best in me even when I can't see it myself. I have a daughter who'll never know what it's like to be unloved or unsafe. I have a home I built with my own hands on land that's truly mine. I have neighbors who respect me, friends who care about me, a future that stretches out bright and full of possibility. We have all that, Lydia corrected. This is ours, Caleb. Every bit of it, built together. Built together, he agreed, pulling her closer. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge. 3 people who'd found each other, or perhaps been found by grace, by fate, by whatever force in the universe conspires to bring broken things together and make them whole. Winter came again, but it felt different this year. Not like something to be endured, but like a season of rest, of quiet joy, a family cocooned together against the cold. Emma grew and changed daily, becoming more alert, more interactive, more herself. She had Caleb's blue eyes and Lydia's determination, and she owned their hearts completely. Thomas visited for Christmas, bringing gifts and laughter and stories that made Emma giggle. Sarah and Tom and Daniel came too, with their new son who was just 3 months younger than Emma. The house was full of noise and warmth, and the kind of chaos that comes from people who love each other gathering together. To family, Thomas toasted on Christmas Eve, raising his glass. Blood and chosen, old and new, the ones we've lost and the ones we're gaining. May we always be brave enough to love each other loudly. To family, everyone echoed. After the guests had left and Emma was asleep in her cradle, Lydia and Caleb stood on the porch watching snow fall in the moonlight. It was late, past midnight, technically Christmas morning, and the world was silent except for the whisper of snow and the distant sound of the creek. I have something for you, Caleb said, pulling a small box from his pocket. I know we agreed no gifts this year, but I couldn't help myself. Inside was a simple locket, silver and worn, clearly old. Lydia opened it and found 2 miniature portraits, a woman with dark hair and laughing eyes, and a girl of about 17 with the same features. Emma and your mother, Caleb explained. I found an artist in Denver who could work from the photograph of Emma I kept and from your description of Catherine. I wanted you to be able to carry them with you. Wanted our daughter to see the women she's named for. Lydia couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She just turned and kissed him with everything she felt. Gratitude, love, wonder at how he always seemed to know exactly what her heart needed. I love you, she finally managed. So much. More than I have words for. I love you too. He fastened the locket around her neck. Thank you for saving me, Lydia, for seeing me when I was invisible, for loving me when I was unlovable, for building this life with me. Thank you for being worth saving, she countered, for being brave enough to change, for choosing hope over bitterness, for giving me adventures and safety all at once. They stood together watching the snow transform the world into something clean and new, and Lydia thought about journeys and destinations, about foolishness and wisdom, about all the voices that had told her to be careful, be sensible, be safe. She'd ignored them all. She'd followed her heart into unknown territory, and it had led her here, to a ranch in the Colorado mountains, to a husband who'd been broken and was slowly becoming whole, to a daughter who represented every good thing that could grow from choosing love over fear. Years passed, measured in seasons and milestones, and the steady accumulation of life lived fully. Emma grew into a bright, fearless child who did indeed learn to ride before she was fully steady on her feet. 2 more children followed, a son named Thomas after Lydia's father, and another daughter they called Catherine, though everyone called her Kate. The ranch prospered. Caleb's reputation as a horse breeder spread, and buyers came from as far as Denver and Kansas City. Lydia started a small school in Boulder, teaching children to read and write and love books the way her mother had taught her. She also wrote essays about ranch life, stories based on her experiences, and eventually a memoir about loving an outlaw and finding wisdom in foolishness. Thomas Hartwell lived long enough to see all three of his grandchildren, to watch the ranch become successful, to know that his daughter had found the happiness Catherine had always wanted for her. He died peacefully in his sleep during a visit when Emma was 12, Thomas was 9, and Kate was 6. They buried him in Whispering Creek next to Catherine, and Lydia felt the circle complete. Her parents together again, their love story finished but living on in the family they'd created. Mary Beth married and had children of her own. Sarah and Tom's ranch thrived. Daniel became a respected rancher in his own right. The network of people who'd been called foolish for choosing love over convention grew and flourished, proving that wisdom often wore the face of folly. But it was Emma, their first daughter, now a young woman of 20, who asked the question that brought everything full circle. She'd been reading Lydia's memoir, the one that had been published last year to surprising success, and she looked up from the pages with tears in her eyes. "Mama, people really called you foolish for loving Papa?" It was a summer evening. The whole family gathered on the expanded porch that now wrapped around 3 sides of the house. Caleb looked up from the saddle he was mending, interested in how Lydia would answer. "They did," Lydia confirmed. "Many people. They said I was throwing my life away, that I was naive, that I didn't understand the danger, that I'd regret it." "Did you ever regret it?" Emma asked, though her tone said she already knew the answer. "Not for one single moment." Lydia reached for Caleb's hand. "Not even the hard moments. Not even when we struggled or fought or faced setbacks. Because all of it, every challenge, every difficulty, it was ours. We chose it together." Thomas, now a strapping young man of 17 who looked remarkably like his father, spoke up. "But Mama, you gave up a lot. You left your home, your father, everything you knew. Wasn't that scary?" "Terrifying," Lydia admitted. "But staying would have been worse. Staying would have meant living half a life, always wondering what might have been. And I'd rather have this," she gestured to all of them, to the ranch, to the life they'd built, with all its challenges, than a safe, small life I never really wanted. Kate, 12 and full of questions, leaned forward. "Papa, were you scared too, when you met Mama?" Caleb set down the saddle and pulled his youngest daughter onto his lap. "More scared than I'd ever been, because I knew, the moment I saw your mother, I knew she could save me or destroy me, that I'd never be the same after meeting her, and I was right. She changed everything." "For the better?" Kate pressed. "For the infinitely better." He kissed the top of her head. "You 3 exist because your mother was brave enough to see past what everyone told her I was to who I actually was. Because she chose wisdom that looked like foolishness." Emma closed the memoir, her expression thoughtful. "I want to love like that someday, bravely, without apology, the way you 2 love each other." "You will," Lydia assured her. "And when you do, people might call you foolish. They might not understand, but you'll know, in your heart, in your bones, when something is right, and that knowing is worth more than all the approval in the world." The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. The trees Caleb had planted 15 years ago, the aspen for Emma Rourke, the oak for Catherine Hartwell, had grown tall and strong, their branches creating dappled shadows across the memorial bench. "Tell us about them," Thomas said. "Thomas. About Aunt Emma and Grandma Catherine. Tell us the stories again." So they did. Caleb talked about his sister who'd loved Shakespeare and laughed even in hard times. Lydia shared memories of her mother reading by candlelight, choosing adventure over safety, living fully until her last breath. They talked about the women their children were named for, keeping them alive through stories, through choices, through the way they loved each other and their family. As darkness fell and the children drifted inside one by one, Lydia and Caleb remained on the porch, sitting in the same spots they'd occupied on countless evenings over the years. Emma Creek sang its eternal song in the distance. The mountains stood watch as they always had. And 2 people who'd found each other against impossible odds sat hand in hand, comfortable in the life they'd built. Do you remember what people called us? Caleb asked softly. Which thing specifically? They called us many things. He smiled. You know which one? The big one. Lydia thought back to that first winter in Whispering Creek, to the voices that had judged her, warned her, predicted her failure. She thought about the women who'd crossed the street to avoid her, the men who'd pitied her father, the certainty with which people had declared she was making a terrible mistake. They called me foolish, she said, for loving an outlaw with nothing to offer but trouble and heartache. And what did you call it? It was the same question he'd asked 15 years ago on the porch of their first small house. She'd given him an answer then. Wisdom, grace, the best decision she'd ever made. All of it had been true. But now, with years of marriage behind them, with 3 children grown and growing, with a life that had exceeded every hope she'd dared to harbor, she had a fuller answer. I call it love, she said simply. The truest kind. The kind that transforms everything it touches. The kind that takes 2 broken people and makes them whole. The kind that builds ranches and raises children and creates beauty from ashes. She turned to face him, this man who'd been an outlaw and was now a devoted father, a successful rancher, a pillar of their community. She saw the silver threading through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, the scar on his jaw that she'd traced 1,000 times. They called me foolish for loving you, she continued. But you called me your greatest wisdom, and I think we were both right. Love is foolish. It defies logic, ignores evidence, takes insane risks. But it's also the greatest wisdom there is. Because love sees what everyone else misses. Love knows truths that reason can never grasp. Love is brave enough to believe in transformation, in redemption, in the possibility that people can change and grow and become more than their worst moments. Caleb's eyes were bright with emotion. I would have died without you. Maybe not physically, but in every way that matters. I would have stayed frozen in that moment of grief and rage, never moving forward, never healing. You gave me back my life, Lydia. My whole life. And you gave me courage to claim mine, to stop living small and start living fully, to choose adventure over safety, love over fear, hope over despair. She squeezed his hand. We saved each other, Caleb. That's what love does. It saves us from the prisons we build around our hearts. They sat in comfortable silence, and Lydia thought about the girl she'd been, 23 and careful, living in her father's shadow, afraid to want too much or reach too far. That girl wouldn't recognize the woman she'd become. That girl couldn't have imagined this life. But her mother would have recognized it. Catherine Hartwell, who'd chosen a shopkeeper in a wild frontier over Boston society, who'd read Shakespeare by candlelight and taught her daughter that courage and love were the same thing, she would have looked at this life and smiled. Tell me about the book, Caleb said, changing the subject. Have you heard from your publisher about sales? Lydia's memoir had been published under a simple title, The Outlaw's Wisdom, a love story. To her surprise, it had found an audience, other women who'd made unconventional choices, who'd been called foolish for following their hearts, who needed to know they weren't alone. Letters keep arriving, she said, from women all over, some who left comfortable lives for uncertain ones, some who married men their families didn't approve of, some who chose their own paths over the ones prescribed for them. They all say the same thing. Thank you for telling them they aren't foolish. Thank you for showing them that wisdom comes in unexpected forms. You've given them permission to be brave, Caleb said, the way you gave me permission to believe I could be more than my past. We give each other permission, Lydia corrected. That's what love does best. It says, you can be who you really are with me. You can try and fail and try again. You can transform, grow, become. That's the greatest gift we can give anyone. Inside the house, they could hear their children's voices, Emma playing piano, Thomas and Kate arguing about something, then laughing. Normal sounds, beautiful sounds. The sounds of a family that was loved and knew it. Come to bed, Caleb said, standing and pulling her up with him. It's late, and tomorrow's going to be busy. The Hendersons are bringing their mare for breeding, and I promised Emma I'd teach her to break that yearling she's been working with. And I have lesson plans to prepare for the new term, Lydia added. Mrs. Pritchard's daughter is finally old enough for school, and I promised Sarah I'd take special care with her. They walked inside together, checking on each child in turn. Emma bent over a book in her room, Thomas already asleep with a technical manual on horse breeding open on his chest. Kate working on a drawing that looked suspiciously like a wanted poster with her father's face on it, labeled "Wanted for Stealing Hearts." "She's got your sense of humor," Caleb whispered, grinning at the drawing. "And your artistic talent, which is to say, none whatsoever," Lydia teased back. In their bedroom, the same room Caleb had built 16 years ago, but expanded and improved over time, they prepared for bed with the easy familiarity of long marriage. Lydia brushed out her hair while Caleb changed into nightclothes. He was still reading when she climbed into bed, his reading glasses perched on his nose, a new book of poetry open in his hands. "What are you reading?" she asked, settling against his shoulder. "Dickinson. Listen to this one. The heart wants what it wants, or else it does not care." He looked down at her. Simple but true. The heart knows, even when the head is confused. "My heart knew you immediately," Lydia said. "That first day in the store. Something in me recognized something in you, even though I didn't understand it yet." "Mine too." He set the book aside and pulled her closer. "I was lost, Lydia, completely lost. And you were true north. You've been true north ever since." They settled into sleep, wrapped around each other the way they'd been for thousands of nights, comfortable and complete. Outside, the ranch slept under a blanket of stars. Emma Creek continued its endless journey toward larger waters. The mountains stood eternal and unchanging, witnesses to countless human dramas playing out in their shadow. But this particular drama, the story of an outlaw and a shopkeeper's daughter, of wisdom found in foolishness, of grace offered and received, this story had found its happy ending. Or rather, its happy continuation. Because love stories don't really end, they just keep going, day after ordinary day, building a life from the small moments that don't make it into legends. The morning coffee shared in comfortable silence. The inside jokes that no one else understands. The way hands find each other automatically after years of practice. The choosing and re-choosing that happens every day, every hour, every moment. That's the wisdom that looks like foolishness, knowing that love isn't a destination, but a journey. That it requires courage, not once, but constantly. That it transforms not in dramatic moments, but in the steady accumulation of days spent choosing each other over and over again. Lydia fell asleep thinking about a question Caleb had asked her 15 years ago, standing in this very room with baby Emma in his arms. "Do you ever regret it?" She'd answered then, and she'd answer the same way for the rest of her life. Not for 1 second, not for one single moment. Because foolishness that leads to this much love, this much joy, this much life. That's the greatest wisdom of all. And somewhere in whatever place souls go when bodies fail them, two women, one who'd loved Shakespeare and one who'd chosen adventure, smiled and nodded and whispered, "Well done, daughter, well done." The girl who'd been called foolish for loving had become the woman who'd found wisdom in that foolishness. The outlaw who'd thought he had nothing to offer had built an empire of love. And together, they'd proven that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust your heart when everyone else tells you you're wrong. That's the story. That's the wisdom. That's the love that lasts. And it all began with a girl who looked twice, and a man who dared to hope she'd see him.